Welcome back to Potter Read, the channel where the old magic runs deep. Today's story: Garrick Ollivander raised Harry from age 4 and taught him the forgotten secrets of Wandlore. If you haven't yet, do smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so a new tale never slips past you. Now settle in and let's begin. Chapter 1. The Wood remembers. The cupboard under the stairs at number 4 Privet Drive was made of pine, and pine, though nobody in that house knew it, is a wood that listens. Harry Potter was 4 years old and he did not know it either. He knew only the shape of the space he slept in, the slope of the ceiling that came down to meet the floor, the single bare bulb on its frayed cord, the smell of furniture polish and dust, and the faint, sweet rot of an apple core he had hidden weeks ago and forgotten. He knew the 4 spiders who lived in the corner and did not mind him. He knew the underside of the 13th stair, which was where Dudley's foot came down hardest, so that a thread of gray light showed in the seam of the wood each morning when the house woke. He had pressed himself against that pine on other nights, many of them, whenever the shouting had been very bad or the hunger very loud, because the wall of the cupboard was the one surface in all of number 4 that did not belong to the Dursleys in the way the rest of it did. The carpet was theirs, and the good china was theirs, and the whole bright upstairs of the house was theirs, but the raw pine of the cupboard, unpainted, unloved, hidden away where no visitor would ever see it, felt somehow like it might be allowed to be his. On those nights it had done nothing but be there, cool at first and then oddly warm under his cheek, warmer than a plank of dead wood in a cold cupboard had any business being, and he had never thought to wonder at it. He simply took the warmth and slept, and in the morning forgot. The wood had never once made a sound. On the night it began, the house woke angry. He had spilled the milk, that was the whole of it. A tin cup too full, carried across a kitchen too bright, and his hand had trembled and the milk had gone across the clean floor in a white tongue, and Aunt Petunia's voice had come down on him like a lid coming down on a pot. He did not remember all the words. He remembered the sound of them, high and thin and endless, and he remembered being put into the cupboard with the bolt drawn across, and he remembered lying on the thin blanket with his knees pulled to his chest and the taste of milk still on his mouth and no supper coming. He pressed his cheek against the pine. He did not do it for any reason he could have named. The wood was cool and it was close, and it was the only thing in the whole house that had never once been unkind to him, and so he pressed his cheek to it the way another child might press against a mother's arm. The grain ran under his skin in long, soft ridges. He breathed. The bulb ticked as it cooled. Somewhere above him Dudley was being read to, and the words came down muffled through the risers, and Harry lay very still and wished, without shape or plan, that the wood would let him inside it, into the quiet dark where no voices went. And the pine hummed. It was not loud. It was lower than any voice, a note felt in the teeth rather than heard, the note a finger draws from the wet rim of a glass. It came up out of the cupboard door and into his cheekbone and down into the floorboards, and the floorboards took it and passed it along the joists, and the joists gave it to the studs inside the walls, and the whole skeleton of the house, every plank and lath and stair tread that had once been a living tree, remembered together that it had been alive and answered. The banister sang. The kitchen table sang under Petunia's spread hands so that she snatched them back. The wooden spoon in the crock sang, and the salad bowl, and the frame around the photograph of Dudley in his christening gown, and the pencils in the jar by the telephone stood up on their points and quivered like the legs of insects. Aunt Petunia's teacup rattled in its saucer without being touched. Uncle Vernon rose from his chair with his newspaper sliding off his lap and stood in the middle of the good sitting room, turning his head from side to side, red and swelling, looking for the thing to shout at and finding only the walls, which were shivering. "Stop it," Petunia said. Her voice cracked in the middle of the word. She was standing at the cupboard door with her hand flat against it, and she could feel the hum coming through the paint into the heel of her palm, and she knew in the deep sealed place where she kept the things she never spoke of exactly what it was and exactly whose it was. Inside, Harry heard her, and the crack in the middle of her voice put a cold weight low in his stomach worse than the shouting had, and he pulled his cheek back from the wood. The house went quiet all at once, as a held breath is let go. The pencils dropped, the teacup stilled. In the sitting room Vernon stood a moment longer with his fists opening and closing, and then he said too loudly that it was the pipes, it was the blasted pipes, he'd have a man out, and he sat back down and shook his newspaper straight and did not look at his wife. Petunia did not move from the cupboard. She stood with her hand on the door and her thin shoulders drawn up around her ears, and after a long while she said, through the wood in a voice meant for no one, "You'll not do that in my house." Harry did not understand that he had done anything. He understood only that he had been by himself in the dark and the wood had been kind, and now Aunt Petunia had gone white and shaking, and when she went white and shaking she turned cruel, and so the kindness had cost him something, as kindness always seemed to. He lay back down. He put his hand flat against the pine, gently now, as one touches a dog that has been startled, and he did not ask it for anything, and it did not sing. But it was warm under his palm where his cheek had been, warmer than the cool night should have left it, and it stayed warm a long time, and he fell asleep with his hand on it, and the 4 spiders in the corner kept their watch. In the morning, Aunt Petunia had made a decision. He could tell because of how quiet she was. The angry mornings were loud. This was worse. She dressed him in Dudley's outgrown anorak, the green one with the broken zip, and she wiped his face too hard with a flannel, and she did all of it without once meeting his eyes, and when she took him by the wrist her fingers were cold and did not let go. Uncle Vernon had already gone to work. Dudley was left with Mrs. Figg 2 doors down, howling at the injustice of being left anywhere. Petunia put Harry into the front of the car on the seat, which had never happened, and she drove. She drove for a long time. Harry watched Little Winging thin out into a motorway and the motorway widen and fill, and he watched the fields go by gray and stubbled under a low October sky, and he did not ask where they were going because he had learned that asking was a way of getting hurt. Petunia did not speak. Her hands were high and tight on the wheel, and her mouth was pressed into a line that had no give in it, and every few miles she looked at him sideways, quick, checking a wound she could not make herself look at directly. The city came up around them gray and enormous. She parked badly, half on a curb in a narrow street where the buildings lined. She got him out. She held his wrist and walked him fast along a pavement crowded with legs and coats and the wheels of prams, and the noise of the place came down on Harry from every side, engines and voices and a busker's accordion and the hiss of buses, and he kept his eyes on his own shoes and let himself be pulled. They stopped. He knew they had stopped because the tugging stopped. He looked up. They were standing outside a public house so grubby and so small that the eye seemed to want to slide off it and go to the bright bookshop on one side or the record shop on the other. It had a swinging sign too weathered to read and a door of old black oak. The people flowing past did not look at it. A woman with shopping bags walked straight from the bookshop to the record shop, and the grubby pub between them might have been a stretch of blank wall for all her eyes admitted of it, and Harry watched her do it and felt the skin on his arms go strange. Petunia was not looking at the pub. She was looking at Harry, and her face had come undone in a way he had never seen, the hard line of her mouth trembling, her eyes overbright. She crouched. It put her face level with his, and this too had never happened, and he went very still under it, animal still. "Your mother," she said and stopped. Her throat worked. "Your mother used to go in there." She did not point. She only moved her eyes toward the black door and away again, fast, wary of letting them rest there in case looking too long might pull her through. "There's people in there like her, like you." The word came out of her pinched and reluctant, and with something underneath the reluctance that was older and heavier and that she would have died before naming. "They'll know what to do with you. I don't." She drew a breath that shuddered. "I never did." She stood up. She took her hand off his wrist. For a moment Harry did not understand that he was free, because free was not a thing that had ever been done to him. He stood on the pavement in Dudley's green anorak with the broken zip, and he looked up at his aunt, and his aunt looked down at him with her whole face working. And then she said, in the flat voice she used for wiping his face, "Go on then," and she turned, and she walked away very fast into the crowd, and her fair head went bobbing between the coats and the prams and was gone. He did not cry. He had learned long ago that crying was a door that opened onto worse things, and he had bolted it the way his cupboard was bolted from the outside. He stood where she had left him. People walked around him, a rock in a river, and none of them looked down. The accordion played, a bus sighed at the curb. And Harry, 4 years old, alone on a London pavement in a coat that did not fit, turned at last from the direction his aunt had gone and looked instead at the old black door, because it was the one thing in all that gray, roaring street that seemed to be looking back at him. He went to it because he did not know what else to do, and because the door, unlike the street, unlike the whole loud world, seemed to have been left ajar for him. The door was heavier than a door had any right to be. He set both hands to it and leaned his whole weight, and it gave, swinging inward with a groan of old iron, and the noise of the street was cut off behind him as cleanly as a knife takes the top from an egg. Inside was a low dark room full of the smell of wood smoke and spilled beer and something else beneath those, a green herby smell he had no name for. A fire burned in a great stone hearth. Candles floated in the air over the tables, floated with no strings and no stands, drifting a little on the warm currents that rose from the grate, and Harry stood on the threshold with the door swinging shut behind him and looked up at the floating fire and forgot, for a moment, the cold knot he carried everywhere under his ribs. Old men bent over a chessboard where the pieces walked themselves from square to square. A woman in a pointed hat stirred a pot that stirred itself. Behind the bar a bald and toothless man was polishing a glass, and he looked up, and his eyes went to the doorway and found the small figure standing there in the too big green anorak, and his polishing slowed. "Now then," said the barman, not unkindly. "You lost, are you?" Harry did not answer. He had learned that answering grown men was dangerous, and besides, he did not know the answer. He was not lost because to be lost you had first to have somewhere you belonged, and he could not have said where that was. He only stood, and the candles drifted overhead, and the fire cracked, and the old men at the chessboard had stopped their game and were looking at him now, all of them, in a silence that spread out from him across the room in rings. It was the herby green smell that drew him on. It came from the back from a second door, and behind that door there was light of a different color, and Harry, who had spent his life in cupboards and knew a way out when a way out offered itself, crossed the room quietly between the tables while the grown people watched and did not stop him, and he went to the back door, and he pushed through into a narrow walled yard where dustbins stood, and there in the far wall was nothing but brick. He stood before the brick and did not know what he wanted from it. He put out one hand and laid it flat against the wall the way he had laid his cheek against the pine, because touching was how he asked, and the brick under his palm was cold and gritty and ordinary, and then it was not. It moved. A single brick, 3 up and 2 across from where his fingers rested, shivered in its mortar and drew back and turned, and its neighbor turned, and the wall began to fold itself open from that point outward in a widening arch, brick sliding past brick with a dry stony whisper, the whole growing and growing until it was a doorway, until it was a gateway tall enough for a giant, and beyond the gateway the light of the different color poured through and fell across Harry's upturned face. He stepped through onto the cobbles of Diagon Alley, and the world he had been born into and stolen from opened its arms. It went up. That was the first thing, that everything went up. The crooked houses stacked story on story until they leaned their gables together over the street and left only a winding ribbon of evening sky between, the whole crowded canyon of them lit gold and copper by lamps that were not electric, lamps whose flames were sometimes blue and sometimes the particular soft green of new leaves. It went up and it teemed. Cauldrons stacked outside a shop front to the height of 2 men. A window full of brass instruments that turned and glittered and ticked. A pen of owls, tawny and snowy and small and fierce, blinking their round lamps of eyes down at the street. And people robed and cloaked in tall hats and pointed hats and no hats at all, moving through it all in the last of the light with parcels under their arms and their voices raised in 100 conversations, and none of them so much as glanced at the small figure in the green anorak standing frozen at the mouth of the arch, because in Diagon Alley a wide-eyed child at dusk was the least remarkable thing there was. Harry breathed the resin and copper air of the place, and something in him that had been folded up very small for 4 years began, without his leave, to unfold. He walked. He did not decide to. His feet took him, one cobble and then the next, deeper in. He passed the apothecary and its window of jars, dried things curled and pale, a barrel of what might have been eyes, a hank of something silver and fine as spun glass that turned his head as he went by. He passed a shop of robes where a bolt of cloth in the window was changing its color slowly from midnight to plum to the deep dried red of old blood and back again. He passed a bookshop whose door stood open, and out of it came a smell of paper and dust and leather so thick and warm he stopped and breathed it, and inside, in the lamplight, the books were chained to their shelves, and some of them were straining at the chains. He passed a shuttered parlor with iron chairs stacked upside down on its little tables, and the ghost of vanilla hung about its closed door, and his stomach turned over with a hunger the cocoa was still hours away from touching. And all the while, though he did not yet understand it, the wands were waking to him. He could not have known what was in the shops he passed. He knew only that here and there, as he went by a certain window or a certain door, something turned toward him in the dark inside. It was the same turning he had felt in the pine of the cupboard, that sense of a sleeping thing lifting its head. In the window of a dim little shop hung with strings of what he would later learn were unfinished wand blanks, a length of pale wood on a velvet cushion rolled a half-turn toward the glass as he passed and lay still again. He did not see it. He felt it the way you feel a person's gaze on the back of your neck in an empty room, and he walked a little faster, drawn on by the pull of it, not knowing that the pull had a shape, not knowing that the whole length of the alley was quietly leaning after him, that in 100 cluttered rooms slivers of holly and yew and hawthorn and vine were stirring in their boxes and their bins, remembering the forests they had come from, answering a call none of them could have named. At the far dark end of the street, where the lamps grew fewer and the shops grew older, one shop was answering louder than all the rest. It was a narrow, shabby shop, so shabby it might have been mistaken for empty. Peeling gold letters over the door read Ollivanders, makers of fine wands since 382 BC, and in the dusty window, upon a single faded purple cushion, one wand lay alone. The lights inside were out. A card in the door said the shop was closed. But as Harry came down the street toward it, footsore now, hungry, the cold of the October evening finding its way at last through the broken zip of the green anorak, the single wand in the window turned on its cushion to face him, and the whole dark shop behind it filled with a sound. He stopped on the cobbles outside and looked up at the peeling gold letters he could not read, and he listened. It was the pine note again, the note felt in the teeth, but here it was not one note, it was thousands. It came up out of the shop as though the building were an enormous instrument that had stood silent 100 years, and was only now, at his coming, remembering the whole of its music. High strings and low strings, notes like bells and notes like breath, some of them bright and eager and some of them slow and grave and old, all of them different and all of them singing the same thing, which was here, which was at last, which was a word in a language older than words. And Harry stood in the cold on the empty street with his hand pressed flat against the shop's window, and his heart going quick and light in his chest. And for the first time since Aunt Petunia had let go of his wrist, he was not alone, because 5,000 wands were awake in the dark, and every one of them knew that he had come. Inside, a light moved. The light came from the back of the shop, a candle carried in a wandering hand, and it swelled and brightened as it came forward through the dark rows until it reached the door and stopped, and a bolt was drawn, and the door opened inward on a breath of cool cedar-scented air, and an old man looked out. He was very old and very pale, with hair like the fluff of a blown dandelion and eyes the color of moonlight on still water, wide and silver and gleaming, and those eyes came down and found Harry standing on the step, and they went still. For a while neither of them spoke. The candle flame stood straight in the windless dark. Behind Ollivander, the 5,000 wands had gone quiet the moment the door opened, quiet and waiting, listening the way the room at the leaky cauldron had listened, and in all that hush the only sound was the far-off clatter of the alley winding down for the night and the soft break in Ollivander's breathing. "Well," said Ollivander at last, very softly. "Well, well, well." He did not shout, and he did not reach out, and he did not do any of the sudden loud grown-up things that meant harm was coming. He only looked, and his silver eyes moved over Harry's face slowly, from the black hair that would not lie flat to the round green eyes, and there they stopped and stayed, and something moved behind them like weather far out at sea. "Those eyes," Ollivander murmured. "I would know those eyes at the bottom of the ocean. Willow 10¼ inches, swishy, very good for charm work. She held it as though she had been born with it in her hand, your mother. Some are, most are not." His gaze rose from the green eyes to the fringe of black hair, and one pale finger lifted, not touching, only indicating, tracing in the air the shape of the thin mark that showed at Harry's hairline. "And that," he said, and now his voice had gone down to nearly nothing, "I know as well. The whole of our world knows it, though the whole of our world believed you tucked away safe and warm and 100 miles from here." The silver eyes came back down to Harry's. "Harry Potter," said Ollivander, "on my doorstep. At dusk, in a coat 3 sizes too large, and no one holding your hand." Harry did not know most of the words. He knew his own name because Aunt Petunia used it when she was cross, and he understood from how Ollivander said it that there was no anger in it, and he understood too, from some deeper sense, the same sense that read the wood, that this pale strange person with the moon in his eyes had known his mother, had touched something his mother had touched, and that this was a thing that had never happened before, that no one in the whole of his 4 years had ever once said your mother to him with kindness in it. He said the only thing he had. He said, "I'm hungry." Ollivander blinked. Whatever had been building behind the silver eyes broke like a wave breaking, and he came down at once out of his mystery and became, in an instant, an old man in a cardigan finding a cold and hungry child on his step in October. "Of course you are," he said, "of course. Look at you. Come in, mind the boxes. There are a great many boxes, and they none of them expect visitors at this hour." He stood aside and drew the door wide, and Harry stepped in over the threshold of Ollivander's, makers of fine wands since 382 BC, and the wands sighed all together in their thousands, a sound like wind moving through a wheat field, and settled. Inside it was all shadow and towers. The shop was narrow and ran back impossibly far, and the walls on both sides went up past the reach of the candlelight, shelf upon shelf, every shelf stacked with narrow boxes, thousands upon thousands of them, some new and pale, some so old the cardboard had gone soft and gray and furred with dust. Harry tipped his head back and looked up into a darkness that had no ceiling he could find, and each box, he understood without being told, held one wand, and each wand had once been part of a tree that had stood under some particular sky, and all that vanished forest was, at this moment, paying quiet attention to him. He felt the attention on his skin like the warmth off a banked fire. It asked nothing of him. It only knew that he had come and was glad in the slow, patient gladness of wood that he had, and let him be. A long tape measure lay coiled on the counter like a sleeping snake, and as Harry passed it, it lifted its silver end an inch off the wood and turned to follow him, and Ollivander said, without looking, "Not now," and it lay back down. He sat Harry in a spindly chair by the counter. He took the green anorak with the broken zip and hung it on a peg, and he looked at what was under it, the too thin jumper, the wrists gone bony, and his mouth pressed together, and said nothing. He went into the back through a curtain, and there were sounds of a kettle and a cupboard, and he came out again with a chipped enamel mug held in both his old hands, and he put it into Harry's, and it was cocoa, hot and too sweet, made with more sugar than any grown-up had ever willingly given him, and Harry wrapped both hands around the mug and drank and did not stop until it was gone. While he drank, Ollivander asked him quiet questions and got quiet answers and read a great deal in the gaps between them. Where had he come from? A house. Whose house? His aunt's. And how had he come to be so far from his aunt's house, all alone at this hour? Here Harry stopped drinking and looked into the last of the cocoa and said that his aunt had brought him and that she had gone. He did not say more, but the shape of it was in how he said gone, flat and final and already tucked away, and Ollivander heard the shape and did not make him fill it in. On the counter, the cold tape measure had crept nearer while they talked, and it laid its silver end against Harry's sleeve, very lightly, the way a cat that has decided about you settles against your leg, and this time Ollivander let it be. "It likes you," he said. "It is a frightful busybody, and it likes almost no one, and it likes you. Well, it has always had better sense than I gave it credit for." He had drawn up a wooden crate to sit on so that his moon eyes were level with the child's, and now he leaned and took the empty mug gently out of Harry's hands and set it on the counter and folded his long fingers between his knees and did not hurry him. "Now," he said, "Harry, I am going to tell you 3 things, and then I am going to ask you nothing at all tonight, because you are 4 years old and it is late and you have come a very long way. Are you listening?" Harry nodded. The cocoa had made him warm from the inside, and the warmth was strange and enormous, and he sat very still inside it so as not to frighten it away. "The first thing," said Ollivander, "is that you are safe here. I know that word has not meant a great deal to you, and I will not ask you to believe it merely because I have said it. I will let this place prove it to you slowly, which is the only honest way, but I say it now so that it is said." He lifted one finger. "The second thing, my name is Ollivander. I make wands. I have made them in this shop longer than you would believe, and my family made them before me back to time when your Roman soldiers were tramping their roads across this island and cutting down the sacred groves to build them." His silver eyes glinted. "Every wand that has ever left this shop I remember. I remember the wood of it and the heart of it and the hand that took it up. Your father, Harry, mahogany, 11 inches, pliable, excellent for transfiguration. A wand with a sense of mischief in it, and he had the same, and they suited each other very well. I sold it him when he was 11 years old and full of himself and glorious, and I remember his face when it chose him, and I will remember it after everything else in this old head has gone to dust." Harry was watching Ollivander's mouth make the words, and though he understood perhaps 1 word in 3, he understood the largest thing, which was that there had been a father, that the father had once stood where he was sitting, that the father had had a face and that face had been glorious, and Harry, who had never before had anywhere to put the fact of a father, sat holding it in the warm cocoa dark of his chest and did not move. "The third thing," said Ollivander, and here he leaned forward and his voice dropped into the register Harry had heard singing up out of the shelves, the low register the pine had used, "is about the wood, because you have already met it, haven't you? Somewhere in that house they kept you in. You put your face against something wooden when you were unhappy, and it answered you, didn't it?" Harry's eyes came up to his, round. "You needn't say, I can see that it did." Ollivander turned his silver gaze slowly along the towering shelves, up into the dark where the candlelight failed. "People believe," he said, "that a wand is a stick a wizard waves to make magic happen. People believe wood is a dead thing, a thing you make chairs and doors and coffins out of, and that the magic is all in the wizard and the wood is only a sort of handle. People believe a great many convenient and comfortable things, Harry, and nearly all of them are wrong." He was very still now, and the wands were very still, and the candle burned without a flicker. "Wood is not dead. A tree stands in one place for 200 years, and it drinks the rain, and it eats the light, and it feels the wind come round from the east every autumn, and it remembers in its rings and its grain every single year that it lived. And when it is cut and dried and shaped and given a heart, it does not stop remembering. It remembers the forest. It remembers being alive. And it remembers, most of all, the one hand out of all the thousands that reaches for it and belongs to it. A wand chooses the wizard, Harry. That is the first law of my craft and the last, and there is not one wand maker in 100 left living who understands the whole of what it means." Harry thought about this with the whole of his attention, which was considerable, and at the end of his thinking he asked the question that mattered most to him, which was, do they get lonely if nobody picks them? Ollivander did not answer at once. When he did, his voice had changed. "Yes," he said, "some of them wait a very long time. I have wands on those shelves that were made before your grandparents were born, and they have watched 1,000 children come through that door and put out no spark for any of them and been put back in the dark to wait again. It is not sadness quite the thing they feel. Wood does not grieve as you and I do. Its clock runs slower, and its heart is patient past our understanding. But there is a kind of waiting that is very like it, and I have felt it in this shop on winter nights when the trade is thin. And then a day comes, the door opens. A particular child walks in out of all the children in the world, and one wand out of 5,000, one that has waited 100 years without a flicker, feels that hand approaching down the length of the shop before the child has so much as reached the counter, and it wakes Harry. It wakes the way you woke a whole street of them tonight without touching a single one, and in that moment the waiting was worth it, every year of it. That is the thing I have given my life to, and until this evening I believed I would carry the understanding of it to my grave with no one to hand it on to." He sat back on his crate. In the hush from somewhere high on the left-hand shelves, a single box gave a soft, insistent rattle once, twice, a wooden knocking that carried down through all that listening dark, and Ollivander's eyes lifted to it and narrowed, and a strange stillness came over his face. "Hush," he said to it gently. "Not tonight. He is not ready, and neither, I think, are you." And the rattling stopped. But his eyes stayed on that high shelf a moment longer, and whatever he was thinking he kept behind his teeth, and then he turned back to the child in the chair and his face softened all over. "You are asleep on your feet," he said, "and I have talked, which is a thing I am told I do. Come." He took Harry back through the curtain into a warm back room that smelled of tea and wood oil and the particular dust of old paper. There was a narrow bed against one wall, made up with a gray blanket and a stove, and a great scarred workbench under the window crowded with tools Harry had no names for, gouges and planes and tiny bright knives and coils of gold and silver wire, and jars of pale shavings, and half-finished lengths of wood laid out in a row on a strip of green baize like patients in a hospital. Ollivander turned down the blanket. He found in a chest a jumper of his own, gray lambswool worn soft with washing, and he pulled it over Harry's head, and it came down past his knees and swallowed his hands, and Ollivander rolled the cuffs back twice, 3 times, with a care in his old fingers that no one had ever spent on Harry before, and the spending of it put an ache in Harry's throat he did not understand. "In you get." Harry got in. The bed was soft in a way the cupboard floor had never been, and the blanket was heavy and warm, and the stove ticked, and through the doorway he could see the shop stretching away into its darkness, all its thousands of boxes stacked to the invisible ceiling, and he could feel them out there, awake, aware of him. A great gentle attention turned on him from every shelf, and it did not frighten him. It was the opposite of frightening. It was the largest and steadiest warmth he had ever lain down inside. Ollivander set the candle on the workbench, where its light fell across the row of half-made wands on their green cloth. He drew up a stool. He did not leave. He sat by the child in the warm dark with his old hands folded and his moon-pale eyes gleaming, and he looked at Harry the way an astronomer looks at a light in the sky that should not be there, that changes everything, that he has waited his whole long life to see and half believed he never would. "Sir," said Harry from the edge of sleep. It was the first word he had offered without being asked. "The boxes, are they awake?" Ollivander was quiet a moment. "Yes," he said, "they are awake. They have been asleep a long time, most of them, and dreaming of the forests, and tonight something walked into my shop that woke them all at once, and they have not been so awake in 100 years. He leaned nearer, and his voice was hardly more than the movement of air. "Do you know, Harry, in all the years I have made wands in this place, I have watched perhaps 4 children in 1,000 who could feel the wands feeling them. And of those 4, one perhaps in a lifetime could hear what I heard just now, standing at that door when the whole shop sang. You heard it too. I saw your face through the glass." "It was singing," Harry said. His eyes were closing, all different but the same word. Ollivander went very still. "Yes," he said. His voice had thickened. He put out one hand and rested it, light as a leaf, on the top of the black untidy head and left it there, and Harry did not flinch from it, which he would have flinched from any hand a day ago. "All different but the same word. That is exactly what it is, and there is not a master wandmaker living in England who could have told you so, and you are 4, and you have not been taught a single thing, and you knew it on the pavement in the cold." He drew a breath that shook. "Sleep now. You are home." "I did not know until this evening that I had a home to give, and it seems I have had one all along and only wanted the giving of it. Sleep." And Harry, warm to the marrow in a borrowed jumper with an old man's hand resting light upon his hair and 5,000 wands keeping watch over him in the dark, slept and did not dream of cupboards. Ollivander sat by him a long time. Outside, Diagon Alley put out its lamps one by one, and the crooked houses folded into the dark, and the October night came down cold over London, over the Muggle city and the hidden one alike, over the woman driving fast and alone back to Little Winging with her hands white on the wheel, and her mouth pressed hard against something she would never once let out. In the warm little room, the stove ticked and cooled. On the high left-hand shelf, a single box of holly, 11 inches, with a heart taken from a phoenix that had given only one other feather in all the world, lay quiet at last, having said what it had waited 9 years to say, content for now to wait a little longer. And the old wandmaker looked down at the sleeping child and let himself feel all the way through the tenderness he had spent 100 solitary years keeping carefully unfelt, and he did not fight it, and it did not break him, and when at last he rose to bank the stove for the night, his step was lighter than it had been since he was young. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. The grain of days. Ollivander's shop woke before Ollivander did, and Harry learned the sound of its waking before he learned anything else. It began in the dark, an hour before the winter dawn came gray over the chimney pots of Diagon Alley. First the shop shifted, all its thousands of boxes settling a fraction on their shelves with a dry papery sigh, the way a sleeper turns over toward morning. Then the older wands stirred, the ones on the high shelves that had waited longest, and their stirring ran down through the newer stock in a slow descending chord, wood remembering wood. By the time the milk cart clattered past outside and the lamplighter came round with his long pole to put out the street lamps, the whole shop was quietly, patiently awake, 5,000 hearts of dragon and phoenix and unicorn all turning toward the one small sleeper in the back room, and Harry would lie in the narrow bed with the gray blanket up to his chin and listen to it and know, before he opened his eyes, exactly where he was. He had been at Ollivander's 6 weeks. He still woke each morning braced for the bolt and the shouting, his body remembering the cupboard before his mind remembered the shop. And each morning the shop was there instead, warm and resinous and full of that gentle attention, and the bracing went out of him a little more slowly than the day before, and a little more completely. Ollivander rose late and worked late and forgot to eat, and had lived alone so long that he narrated himself as he went, muttering to the wands and the kettle and the account book like old acquaintances who might be persuaded to behave. Into this settled solitude, a 4-year-old had dropped like a stone into a still pond, and the ripples had not stopped spreading. There was a child's cup now among the wand-maker's things. There was a low stool by the workbench that had not been there in November. There was, folded on a shelf, a leather apron cut down to fit a very small person, its pockets sized for very small hands, and Ollivander had made it himself over 3 evenings, pricking his fingers and swearing softly and refusing all offers of help, because it was the first thing he had made for a living person in many years that was not a wand, and he found he wanted to do it alone. "You will not touch the finished stock," Ollivander told him on the first proper morning, which was the closest thing to a scolding Harry would receive from him for years. "The made wands are not toys, and they are not asleep, whatever they may look like. They are waiting, and a waiting thing is a proud thing, and you do not put your fingers on a proud thing without leave. But this." He led Harry to the far end of the workshop where the raw wood was kept and opened a long, shallow drawer. "This you may touch. This is not yet anybody's, this is only itself." Inside the drawer, laid on dark cloth, were lengths of pale unfinished wood, none longer than Harry's forearm, each a different color and a different grain. They did not sing the way the finished wands sang. They hummed low and separate, each in its own key, and Harry stood on his stool and looked at them with his hands held carefully behind his back. "Go on," said Ollivander. "One finger, tell me which of them you like." Harry put out one finger and touched the nearest, a length the color of weak tea, close-grained and cool. Nothing happened exactly, but the humming under his fingertip changed, the way a person's face changes when you say their name. He moved along the row. The second was reddish and warm, and its hum came up eager to meet him, almost pushy, and he took his finger away from that one quickly. The third was very pale, almost white, and its hum was even and steady and did not change whether he touched it or not, patient as a held note. The fourth was near black, and it did not want his finger, and he knew it did not, and he left it alone. Ollivander watched all of this with his silver eyes half closed. "The red one pushed at you," he said. "It was not a question. That is hawthorn. A contrary wood, healer and curse worker both, and it runs hot. It likes to be first, and a wand maker must keep a firm hand on it, or it will hurry the work and spoil it. The eager ones are not always the good ones, Harry. Remember that, and the dark one you would not touch. That is blackthorn, a warrior's wood, and it is not wicked, whatever the pushed-away feeling told you, but it is hard, and it gives its whole loyalty only to a wizard who has walked through fire with it, and it was quite right to have no interest in a boy who has walked through nothing yet. The pale one that did not change is holly. Holly guards. It runs cool, and it takes the heat out of anger, and it is faithful past all sense, and it does not fuss over whether you like it, because it has already decided whether it likes you, and it does not change its mind." Harry looked at the pale holly a long moment. Then, because he was 4 and honesty had not yet been trained out of him, he asked, "Has it decided about me?" Ollivander closed the drawer, not quickly, but firmly, the way you close a book at a place you mean to return to. "That," he said, "is a question for another year." And he set Harry to sweeping shavings, which a 4-year-old can do badly, and which Harry did badly and with enormous concentration, and the day went on. This was how the lessons came in those first months, folded into the ordinary grain of the days, never sat down and delivered, always slipped in sideways while their hands were busy. Harry learned the names of the woods the way another child learns the names of colors, by living among them. He learned that cedar which lined the deep drawers was chosen to keep the wood stores calm, because its smell soothed the raw blanks the way a low voice soothes a nervous horse. He learned to hold a length of wood up to the gray window and turn it and read the grain, the tight years and the wide years, the drought summers written thin and the wet summers written fat, a whole tree's life laid open in rings. He could not have said at 4 that he was being apprenticed. He knew only that he was being kept, and that being kept felt like being taught, and that the two had become, in the warm dust of the shop, the same thing. He was still, in every other way, a small and wary animal. He hid food. Ollivander found a heel of bread going hard behind the flour tin, tucked away against a hunger that was over and that Harry's hands had not yet been told was over, and Ollivander did not say a word. He simply began from that day to leave things where Harry could reach them. An apple in the bowl at child height, a biscuit tin with the lid left loose, the jar of too sweet cocoa on the bottom shelf. He said nothing, and Harry took nothing openly, and the crusts behind the flour tin grew fewer, and 1 week there were none, and neither of them ever spoke of it at all. The owl came in December. It was a school owl, gray and businesslike, and it tapped at the window over the workbench, and Ollivander read the letter standing up with his spectacles down on his nose, and read it again, and then sat down on his crate rather heavily and looked at it a while without reading it a third time. I wrote to a man, he said at last to Harry, who was sitting on the floor sorting phoenix quills and pretending not to watch, 6 weeks ago, when you came to me. I wrote to the one man in England who ought to know that the child he had hidden was hidden no longer, because it would have been a low sort of cowardice not to. He has taken his time in answering. He is a busy man and a careful one. He is coming this afternoon. Harry did not know who was coming, so he asked the only thing that mattered. Is he going to take me back? Ollivander looked at him over the spectacles a long moment. No, he said, he is not. I want you to hear me say it plainly, because you are a boy who counts on the worst thing happening, and I will not have you sitting there all afternoon counting on it. He is not going to take you back to that house. That house is finished. It cannot hold you now, for reasons I will explain when you are old enough to hold them. What he is going to do is decide whether you may stay here with me, and I am going to persuade him that you will. Do you understand? Harry understood the important part, which was that Ollivander wanted him to stay and was going to fight for it, and this was so far outside anything that had ever happened to him that he could find nothing to say, and so he went back to sorting the phoenix quills and put them all in the wrong order, and Ollivander did not correct him. Albus Dumbledore arrived as the light was failing, and the shop bell, which had a particular way of announcing customers, did not so much ring for him as fall silent, the wands going still on their shelves all at once, the way a wood goes quiet when something large steps into it. He was tall and thin, and his silver hair and silver beard were tucked into his belt, and he wore traveling robes of a deep midnight blue, and he stood in the doorway with the last gray light behind him and took the whole shop in with one unhurried sweep of his half-moon spectacles, and his eyes, when they found Harry sitting small and watchful by the box of quills, were very blue and very kind and did not miss a single thing. Harry, who had spent 4 years learning to read the weather of grown-ups, read this one and could not find the storm in him, which was itself a kind of warning, because Harry had never met a grown-up without a storm somewhere, and a person with no visible weather is a person keeping his weather where you cannot see. Garrick, said Dumbledore. Albus, said Ollivander, you will have tea. Harry, this is Professor Dumbledore, who is a friend to your mother and father. Professor, this is Harry, who has been sweeping my floors abominably for 6 weeks and mending, I think, in the places that matter. Harry, take the professor's cloak. Harry took the cloak. It was heavier than it looked and smelled of wood smoke and lemon and something cold and high and clean like the air after snow, and as he carried it to the peg he felt, through the wool, the presence of the thing in the inner pocket, the wand, and it stopped him where he stood. He had by now stood near a great many wands. They all sang, each its own key, and he had begun without knowing it to hear the singing the way a child raised in a house of musicians hears music, as the ordinary sound the world makes. But the thing in Dumbledore's pocket did not sing like the others. It was louder, though it made no more sound. It was the way a cathedral bell is louder than a handbell even when both are still, a matter of mass and not of volume. And it was old, older than the oldest box on the highest shelf, old past the shop's whole memory, and its note was not one note but a long braided cord of notes, hundreds of them, laid one over another down the years, each the print of a different hand that had held it, a rope of ownership so long and so knotted that Harry's mind slid off the end of it and could not find the beginning. He stood with the cloak half lifted toward the peg and did not know he was staring, and did not hear Ollivander say his name the first time. Harry, Ollivander's voice gentle, with a warning laid under it like a hand on the shoulder. The cloak on the peg, and then the kettle, if you please. Harry hung the cloak, he put the kettle on. And he did not look at Dumbledore's pocket again, because Ollivander had told him not to, and Harry had spent his life learning to obey the thing under a grown-up's words rather than the words. But Dumbledore had seen. He had watched a 4-year-old freeze in the act of hanging a cloak and stare at the precise place where a certain wand was concealed, a wand whose existence perhaps 3 people in the world suspected, and Dumbledore's blue eyes had gone, for the length of one breath, very still and very sharp behind the half-moon glass, and then filled up again with their easy warmth, and he had said nothing at all. They drank tea. Harry was given his cocoa and sent to the back room with a picture book of magical beasts, and he sat on the bed and turned the pages and listened through the curtain, understanding perhaps a third of it, remembering without meaning to all of it, in the way of a child who has learned that the words grown-ups say when they think you are not listening are the words that decide what happens to you. The protection is gone, Dumbledore was saying. His voice had changed with the curtain between them. It was quieter, and it had put down its warmth the way a man sets down a heavy bag when he thinks he is alone. I felt it fail in the last week of October. I did not, I confess, understand at once what I was feeling. I built it to last until he came of age. It was anchored in his mother's blood and sealed by his aunt's roof, while he could call that house home, and while she took him in no matter how coldly, the charm held, and the worst of what is left in the world could not touch him there. I built well, Garrick, and I overlooked the one thing that could unmake it, which was that a shelter you are thrown out of is no shelter at all. She did not merely fail to love him. Cold would not have broken it. I made allowance for cold. She cast him out. She carried him to the threshold of our world and set him down and turned her back, and in the doing of it she dissolved with her own hands the thing my hands had built, and there is no putting it back because the blood that sealed it will not seal it twice. There was a silence. Harry heard the small sounds of tea. "You are telling me," said Ollivander slowly, "that the safest place in Britain for this child is now the least safe, that the wards you built are not merely down but cannot be raised again." "I am telling you that, yes. Then I will tell you something in return, Albus, and I will ask you to weigh it as carefully as you weigh everything, which is more carefully than any man I have known." A pause. The crate creaked as Ollivander leaned forward. "This shop is not a house on a suburban street. It has stood on this spot since before there was a London to put it in. It has its own protections, older than yours and of a different kind, and they were not raised by any one wizard's cleverness but laid down slowly, year on year, by the loyalty of the wood. Every wand I have ever made remembers this room. There are 5,000 of them on these shelves, and I could not tell you the 10th part of what they would do altogether to any soul who came through that door meaning harm to a child they had decided to keep. And they have decided, Albus. I did not ask them to." He walked past 100 shops the night he came and woke every wand blank in the alley, and they have been leaning toward this room ever since like sunflowers toward the sun. You will not find him a safer roof than a roof over 5,000 things that love him. Not yours, not anywhere. Dumbledore was quiet a long time. When he spoke again there was something new under his voice, and it took Harry a moment to place it because he had so little experience of it. It was respect given carefully by a man who did not give it often. "I felt the wands go silent when I came in," Dumbledore said. "I took it for the ordinary hush of your stock. It was not, was it? It was 5,000 wands deciding all at once whether to allow me near him." A dry, surprised sound, not quite a laugh. "I have been weighed on finer scales than I knew. Well, that is a protection I did not raise and cannot raise, and I have learned, painfully and more than once, to respect a shelter I did not build. There remain conditions, Garrick, and they are not negotiable, and if you love the child you will keep them without my having to explain twice why they matter. Name them. He is not to be known." The warmth was entirely gone now. This was the cold, precise core of him, and Harry on the bed went very still to hear it, the way you go still at the sound of a door opening in a house you thought was empty. There are men and women alive today who gave everything to a cause that fell the night his parents died, and who believe, some of them rightly, that the cause fell because of him. They are watched, most of them, some are not. And there are others, worse than servants, patient things that were never caught and never named, who would like nothing so much as to know where the Potter boy sleeps. As far as the world is concerned, he is with his aunt, hidden, unreachable, and I will spend a good deal of effort seeing that the world goes on believing exactly that. Here he is, your ward, a foundling, a distant cousin's orphan you have taken in, a quiet child of no importance who sweeps your floors. He does not carry his name in the street. He does not carry that mark uncovered where strangers pass. And when the day comes that he must enter our world under his own name, and it will come, I will know of it first, and I will be ready. Those are the terms. Will you keep them?" "I will keep them," said Ollivander, "as I would keep a wand's secret, which is to say to the grave and past it. Then he may stay." A rustle, the old headmaster rising. "I will look in from time to time. Do not mistake my looking in for doubt of you, Garrick. You have done in 6 weeks what I in 3 years did not manage, which is to make that child stop bracing for a blow. I saw it go out of his shoulders while we talked, and I shall not forget that you did it. But I am a man who has learned the cost of not looking closely enough at the children in his care, and I will look closely at this one for the rest of my life, and you would do well to let me." Harry heard the curtain move and looked up, and Dumbledore was standing in the gap of it with his midnight cloak already on, looking down at him and the picture book with those blue unstormed eyes. "Griffins on the end paper," Dumbledore observed. "A good book. Do you know, I taught your mother, Harry. She sat in the 3rd row and asked more questions than the rest of the class together, and every one of them was worth answering. I see her looking out of your face, which is a thing I did not expect to be glad of, and am." He paused, and his gaze moved just once to Harry's covered forehead and away. "Garrick is going to teach you a very great deal. Learn it." And Harry, the blue eyes came back, and for one instant the warmth thinned and the sharpness showed through it like a blade under silk. "The things you can hear that other people cannot, keep them behind your teeth as your guardian keeps his secrets, not because they are shameful. Because they are yours, and a thing that is yours and rare is a thing other people will try to take. Do you understand me?" Harry did not entirely. But he had understood the shape of it, which was the same shape Ollivander had used about the holly, and Aunt Petunia had used about the wood, that what he was dangerous to be seen being. He nodded. "Good lad," said Dumbledore, and the bell over the door was silent for him again as he went out into the dark, and the wands did not sing until his footsteps had faded up the alley, and then they sang all at once in relief, and the shop was theirs again. Ollivander stood at the window a long while after, watching the dark where the headmaster had gone. Then he pulled the blind and turned and looked at Harry across the shop with an expression that had a great many things folded up inside it. You heard his wand, he said. Harry, who had been told to keep it behind his teeth not an hour before, looked at his own feet and said nothing, which was the wrong answer and the right one, and Ollivander crossed the shop and knelt in front of him with a creak of old knees. Not from me, he said gently. Never from me. From me you hide nothing, do you hear? The whole rest of the world, yes, behind your teeth, deep, where they cannot reach it. But in this room between the two of us there is to be no hiding, because I cannot teach a boy I cannot see, and you cannot bear a gift like yours alone, and I will not let you try. So, you heard his wand, what did you hear? Harry looked up. It was loud, he said, but not with sound, and it was so old I couldn't find the beginning of it, and it wasn't one hand, it was lots of hands, hundreds, all holding it, one on top of the other, going back and back. He frowned, reaching for the thing he had felt and had no words for, like a rope made out of the people who owned it, and the rope was, he stopped, because the word he wanted was not a nice word, and he had learned not to say things that were not nice. Say it, said Ollivander. His silver eyes had gone very intent. In this room, say it. Red, said Harry. The rope was red in some of the places where the hands were. Ollivander was silent so long that Harry began to fear he had said the wrong thing after all. But then the wand-maker let out a breath, and it shook, and he put both his old hands on Harry's small shoulders, not gripping, just resting there, warm and heavy. You will forget you saw that, Ollivander said, in the front of your mind where words live, and you will never speak of it again to any soul, not even to me, unless I ask you. But in the back of your mind, in the place where the wood sense lives, you will keep it because it is true, and one day it may matter more than anything else you know. There are perhaps 3 people living who understand what you looked at this afternoon, and 2 of them are dangerous, and the third is a very old wand-maker who is going to make certain you are never the 4th person left alone with the knowing of it. Now. He rose, and his voice came back up out of the deep register into the ordinary one, and the moment closed over like water. You have had enough of great and terrible things for one day. It is nearly your bedtime, and you have not eaten a proper supper in your life, and we are going to correct the second of those problems immediately. Eggs, I think. Do you like eggs? Harry did not know if he liked eggs. He had never been asked whether he liked anything. He found being asked that the question itself was a kind of food, and he said yes, and it turned out to be true. The winter turned, and the spring came thin and cold up the alley, and Harry grew, as children do, in the places no one is watching. He grew an inch. He grew bolder in the shop and shyer of the street. He learned to work the till standing on his stool, and to wrap a wand in its tissue and lay it in its box with the small ceremony Ollivander required, as you would lay a sleeping thing down, not as you would put away a spoon. And he learned above all to be present at the choosing, which was the great daily drama of the shop, the thing customers came for and the thing Ollivander lived for, and the thing that would, in the fullness of years, reveal to them both exactly what Harry was. Ollivander did not let him sell wands. He was 4, then 5. The ancient theatre of the choosing wanted its old priest, not his small acolyte. But Ollivander let him be there on his stool in the corner by the ladder, quiet as furniture, and Harry watched the choosings the way other children watch the sea, and he began, quietly in the corner, to know the endings before they came. He never spoke, that was the rule, and he kept it. A young witch would come in for her first wand, 11, and trembling and trying not to show it, and Ollivander would loose his tape measure on her and pull down box after box, offering, watching, taking back, reading the misfires the way a doctor reads a pulse. And in the corner Harry would feel the wands come out one by one, and feel which were merely polite to her hand and which woke, and long before Ollivander reached the right box Harry would already know which wand was hers, because it had begun to sing toward her the moment its box was disturbed, the rising note that meant here and at last and yes. He thought this was ordinary. It did not occur to him for a long time that the reason he was the only one who knew was that he was the only one in 100 years who could hear. It was a sharp-faced customer near his 5th birthday who gave him away, and he did not mean to. She was a girl of 11, impatient, and she had been in the shop nearly an hour, and the wands were wary of her. She had a hardness that made the softer woods draw back. Ollivander had tried 19 wands and was beginning, for the first time in Harry's memory, to look tired. He climbed the ladder for the 20th, and his hand went toward a blue box on the 5th shelf, and Harry in the corner felt every wand in the shop hold its breath, because the blue box was wrong, another polite refusal waiting to happen, and 2 shelves up and to the left, a plain brown box had woken the instant the girl crossed the threshold, and had been singing its patient yes for the better part of an hour into a room where only one person could hear it. And that person was 5 years old and tired and forgot himself. Not that one, Harry said, the brown one up higher, it's been ready the whole time. The shop went silent, the girl turned and stared at him. Ollivander on the ladder did not turn, he went very still, one hand on the blue box, and Harry felt the mistake land in his stomach like cold water, and he opened his mouth to unsay it and could not because it was said. Then Ollivander slowly took his hand off the blue box and moved it 2 shelves up and to the left, and closed it around a plain brown box and brought it down. He did not look at Harry. He drew the wand out of its tissue, 10 inches of dark walnut, and held it out to the girl handle first, and she took it uncertain, still half turned toward the child in the corner, and the wand woke in her hand in a rush of red sparks and a warmth that ran up her arm and unclenched, just slightly, the hardness in her face, because a wand that truly chooses you tells you something true about yourself. And what the walnut told her was that her hardness was not the whole of her, and she had not known that. And now she did. Walnut and dragon heartstring, Ollivander said in his choosing voice as though nothing unusual had happened. 10 inches. A wand for a mind that will go its own way and needs a partner clever enough to keep up. Guard it well. He wrapped it, took the coins, and saw the girl to the door, and she went out casting one last look back at the small, silent boy on the stool, and the bell rang ordinary behind her. And then Ollivander closed the shop in the middle of the afternoon, which he never did, and turned the sign, and came and sat down on the floor in front of Harry's stool, so that his moon eyes were below Harry's for once, looking up, and he was quiet a moment, and then he said, "Tell me how long you have been able to do that." Harry thought he was in trouble. Every instinct he owned told him he was in trouble, that he had broken the great rule of quiet, that the cupboard was somewhere in his future after all. His eyes filled, and he fought it and lost and said in a rush, "I'm sorry, I won't do it again. I'll keep it behind my teeth, I promise, Harry." Ollivander took his hands. "Harry, look at me. You are not in trouble. You could not be less in trouble if you tried. Listen now, because this is the most important thing I have said to you since the night you came. For 19 wands this afternoon I read that girl the only way I know how, which is by trial, by offering and watching and taking back, the way my father taught me and his father taught him, the way every wand maker who ever lived has done it, because it is the only way there is. And you sat in that corner and you knew her wand in the first minute, not guessed, knew. You heard it choose her across a whole shop before I had it in my hand. Do you understand that I cannot do that, that there is not a wand maker alive who can do that the thing you did just now and thought was ordinary and expected me to be cross about, is a thing our craft lost so long ago that we no longer even have the grief of missing it, because we have forgotten it was ever ours to lose." Harry did not understand it, not really. But he understood the one thing that mattered, which was that the tears standing in the wandmaker's silver eyes were not angry tears, and that whatever he had done, it had not sent him back to the cupboard. It had done the opposite. It had made Ollivander look at him the way, Harry would understand much later, a person looks at the answer to a prayer they had stopped daring to pray. "You are not to do it in front of customers," Ollivander said, gathering himself, wiping his eyes with the heel of one hand and pretending it was dust. "That is the rule, and now you understand the reason for it, which is better than a rule. But you and I, in the mornings, before we open, you and I are going to find out exactly how far you can hear. Because I think you can hear further than anyone has heard in 1,000 years, and I am 87 years old and did not expect to be given a reason to be excited about the morning, and I have been given one, and it is you." Harry turned 5 that summer, and Ollivander made a thing of it quietly, because he had worked out that no one had ever made a thing of Harry before, and he was a craftsman, and a craftsman corrects a fault when he finds one. There was a cake, lopsided, made by a wandmaker who had not baked in decades, with 5 candles that lit themselves and sang a small tune when they were blown out. There was a paper crown, and there was wrapped in tissue in a wand box, so that Harry's hands shook opening it, thinking for one wild moment that it was a wand, a set of tools. A tiny plane, a tiny gouge, a knife with a handle worn smooth by another child's hand long ago, real tools, sharp ones made for small, serious work. "They were my own," Ollivander said, gruff, looking at the shavings on the floor rather than at Harry's face. "When I was your age, my father gave me these, and I have kept them for 80 years without knowing why, and now I know why. You are not to cut yourself. You are to bring them to me when they need sharpening. And you are, from today, my apprentice, which is not a thing I say lightly, because the last apprentice an Ollivander took was 300 years ago, and the family has made its wands father to child ever since, and I have no child." He stopped. He turned the little plane over in his fingers. "I have no child," he said again in a different voice, and did not finish the sentence, and did not need to, and Harry, 5 years old and holding a dead man's tools that were now his tools, crossed the little distance between them and put his arms around Ollivander's neck, which he had never done to anyone, and Ollivander held very still, as though a wild bird had landed on him and might yet startle away, and then his long arms came up and folded round the small back. And neither of them said anything for a while, and the wands on the shelves sang so softly it was almost not a sound. The second owl came in the autumn. Harry was 6, and it was not a school owl, and it did not tap politely at the window. It came at dusk, a great black bird with eyes like drops of oil, and it did not carry its letter tied to its leg but held it in its beak, and it dropped the letter on the counter and did not wait for a reply, which owls are trained to do, but launched itself back into the dark at once, wanting nothing of that shop beyond the errand. The letter was heavy cream paper with no name on the front, sealed with black wax, and there was a device pressed into the wax that Harry did not know, and Ollivander, when he saw it, did, and his face changed. He read it standing up. He read it once. Then he put it down on the counter and stood with both hands flat on either side of it and looked at it the way a man looks at a snake that has come into the house without haste, calculating the distance. "What is it?" Harry asked. He was 6 now and bolder, and he had learned that in this room he was allowed to ask. "A letter from a collector," Ollivander said. His voice was level and careful, and its very levelness was a kind of alarm, because Ollivander's voice was rarely level. It rose and fell and wandered and sang. Level meant he was holding it still on purpose. "There are men in the world, Harry, who do not want a wand to use. They want wands to own, the way some men own paintings they never look at. And there are very few, rarer and worse, who want not the wands but the knowing, who have heard that there was once a deeper art to my craft than the trade remembers, and who want it the way a thief wants a key. This is a letter from one of those. It is very politely written. It asks whether I would consider selling certain old volumes from my family's library, and certain of my rarer cores at a generous price, to a discerning private buyer who wishes to remain unnamed. It is the third such letter I have had in 30 years, and the other 2 came to nothing, and this one is written in a hand I have seen before and hoped never to see again." He folded the letter along its old creases, and he did not throw it in the fire, which surprised Harry. He put it away in the locked drawer of the desk, the drawer Harry was not allowed to open, and turned the little key, and hung it on its chain around his neck under his shirt. "Why are you keeping it?" Harry asked. "Because you keep the letters of dangerous men," said Ollivander, "so that you know their handwriting when they write again, and he will write again." He looked at the dark window where the black owl had gone, and then he looked at Harry, small and 6 and holding the broom he had been sweeping with, and something moved behind the silver eyes, some old cold thing waking, and then he put it away, deliberately, the way he had put the letter in the drawer, and he came and took the broom and said, "But not tonight. Tonight there are shavings on my floor and a boy who has left half of them in the corner, and there is cocoa, and there is a book about griffins we have not finished. The dangerous men can wait, they are patient, so are we, and we have the better company for the waiting." And he swept, and Harry helped badly, and the black-sealed letter lay in the locked drawer with the little key warm against the wand-maker's chest, waiting, the way wood waits, and the way patient and terrible things wait, for the hand that was, even then, far off in the dark, already reaching. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3. The grammar of magic. By the time Harry was 7, the morning lessons had a shape, and the shape was this. The shop opened at 9, and from 6 until 8, in the cold hush before the trade came, the counter belonged to the 2 of them and to the deep work, and no customer and no owl and no ordinary thing was allowed to touch it. Harry would come out of the back room in the grey light with his hair standing up and his apron already on, and Ollivander would have laid out on the green baize whatever the day's lesson wanted, and they would sit, the wand-maker on his crate and Harry on his stool, knee to knee across the wood, and begin. Harry had grown into the shop the way ivy grows into a wall, until you could not have said where one left off and the other began. He knew the temper of every wood in the stores by its hum. Could read a grain the way he could read the weather. He had learned his vocabulary, as Ollivander called it, and learned it so thoroughly that Ollivander judged him, that autumn, ready for the thing that had no name in the trade any longer, the thing the wand-maker called, for want of a better word, the grammar. "Anyone with a good ear and 40 years to spare can learn the woods," Ollivander said on the first morning of it. He had set 3 wands on the baize, plain shop wands, each with a different heart. "The woods are the words, willow, holly, elder, oak, vine. A wand-maker learns his words the way a poet learns his, and most wand-makers stop there and become, at best, very good makers of sentences other people have already written. But a word alone says nothing. Say holly to me, only holly." "Holly," said Harry. "It means nothing, does it? It is only a sound with a shape. It wants a sentence to live in. And that is what a wand is, not a word but a sentence, and the grammar of it, the thing that binds the wood to the heart and the heart to the hand, is the art my family has kept alive when the whole rest of the world let it die." He touched the first of the 3 wands. 3 words make the sentence. The wood, which is the noun, the thing that stands and endures. The core, which is the verb, the thing that acts, that moves, that does. And the wizard, who is the one the sentence is about. If the 3 do not agree in tense and in temper and in what I can only call their number, then the sentence is nonsense, and the wand misfires or worse, and no power on earth will make it speak true. Your whole life people will hand you wands and tell you the wood and the core, the noun and the verb, and be very proud of themselves for knowing that much. And you and perhaps 4 others living will be able to hear whether the sentence agrees. Now, the cores, pick up the first. Harry picked up the first wand. He knew its heart before his fingers had closed around it, because its heart was loud, and it came up to meet him with a rush and a heat that wanted immediately to do something, anything, to be swung, to be spent. "Dragon," he said, "dragon heartstring, feel how it strains at you. It is the most powerful of the 3 great cores, and it learns the fastest, and it bonds the quickest, and it is also the most likely to burn down your house, because it is a piece of a creature that was all appetite and fire, and it never entirely forgets that it was. A dragon heart wand wants to be used. Leave it a week in a drawer and it sulks. Give it to an angry man and it will be angrier than he is. It is the easiest of the three to turn to cruelty, not because it is wicked, but because it is willing, and willingness with no wisdom behind it is the beginning of most of the harm in the world. Put it down, gently. It does not like to be put down, so be kind about it. Harry laid the Dragonheart wand down, and it grumbled at him, a low, reluctant heat fading out of the wood, and he found he was a little sorry for it. He picked up the second. This heart was quiet. It did not rush at him. It waited, and when he had settled it in his palm, it settled in return, matching him, steady, faithful, and there was under the faithfulness a thin thread of something that made his throat ache without his knowing why. Unicorn, he said softly, because it seemed a wand you should be soft near. Unicorn hair. The most faithful of the three and the most constant and the hardest of all to turn to the dark, so hard that a unicorn core wand will sometimes break before it will do a truly wicked thing, snap itself in its master's hand rather than betray what it is. It gives the steadiest magic and the least showy, and asks in return only to be well used and to be used gladly. That thread you feel under the loyalty, that low sad note, that is the thing you must understand about the unicorn. It was taken from a living creature, and it remembers being alive, and it can pine. Neglect it, or wield it in grief and never enjoy, and it will go melancholy, and its magic will go gray, and it will mourn. I have mended more unicorn wands broken by their owner's sorrow than by any curse. Remember that, put it down. Harry laid the unicorn wand down as gently as he had picked it up, and he did not want to pick up the third because he could already feel it, and it was not like the other two. The third wand's heart was neither loud nor quiet. It was awake. It had been watching him, he felt, the whole time he handled the other two, with a wholly different quality of attention, the attention of something that had its own opinions and had not yet decided to share them. "Go on," said Ollivander, and there was a change in his voice. Harry picked up the third wand. And the heart in it turned toward him, deliberately, the way a person turns to look at you across a room, and it was ancient, and it was free, and it was, unmistakably, choosing whether it cared to be held, and it made the Dragonheart's eagerness look like a child's and the unicorn's faithfulness look like a servant's, because this heart served no one, it decided. And Harry understood, holding it, that he was holding something that had once burned to ash and risen out of its own ashes, and would do so again, over and over, forever, and that there was in it a spark of a fire that did not go out. "Phoenix," he whispered, "Phoenix feather, the rarest of the three and the most independent and the most capable of greatness and the least controllable, because a phoenix gives its feather when and to whom it pleases and keeps back none of its nature in the giving. A phoenix wand will act on its own. It will sometimes do the thing that must be done before its master has decided to do it. It is the only wand that will, now and again, choose its wizard's side over its wizard's command, because a piece of a phoenix keeps a phoenix's judgment, and a phoenix loves what is worth loving and will not be argued out of it." He watched Harry hold the wand, and his silver eyes were very bright. "Now listen, because here is the deep thing, the thing I have taught no living soul and thought I never would. A phoenix that gives one feather will very seldom give another. Its feathers are its years, it does not spend them lightly, but once in a very long while a phoenix gives two. And when it does, the two feathers, though they go into two different woods made by two different hands, into two wands that may travel to opposite ends of the earth and never meet, remain brothers, twins. They keep across any distance a single divided heart, wake one and somewhere the other stirs. Set them against each other and they will not fully fight, because you cannot make one half of a heart hate the other half. We call them brother wands. There are perhaps 3 living pairs in all the world. Hold that feather, Harry, and reach past the wood in your hand out as far as you can and tell me what you feel." Harry closed his eyes. He reached, the way Ollivander had taught him, out past the wand and the counter and the shop, out into the great singing dark, where all the wands he had ever felt still hummed at the edge of hearing. He reached after the phoenix note in his hand, following it out, and for a moment there was nothing, only the ordinary chorus, and then, very far off, so far it was less a sound than the memory of a sound, he felt it. Another phoenix heart, a true twin to the fainter shop feather in his hand, burning steady and lonely somewhere he could not name, and beside it, or near it, a second twin note that was colder, that had something wrong laid over it like frost over a window pane, and both of them so distant, so utterly elsewhere, that reaching toward them was like reaching toward 2 stars. He opened his eyes. "There's 2 of them," he said, "far away, really far, and one of them's got something on it, like ice. Like it's being made to be cold when it isn't cold underneath." Ollivander had gone the color of the pale holly. He reached out and took the phoenix wand very gently from Harry's hand and laid it back on the baize, and for a long moment he did not say anything, and then he said in a voice that had almost no breath behind it, "That is enough grammar for one morning," and he got up and made the cocoa, though it was hours before Harry usually had it, and he put an extra spoon of sugar in, and his hand was not quite steady on the tin. Harry did not understand then what he had felt, or why it had turned his guardian the color of holly. He would understand years later, all at once, on a night when understanding came too fast and too late. For now he drank his cocoa and watched Ollivander stand at the window with his back to the shop, looking at nothing, and he learned from the set of the old shoulders that there were things in the grammar of magic that frightened even Ollivander, who had taught it to him, and he put it obediently into the back of his mind where the wood sense lived, and did not take it out again for a long time. It would be wrong to make those years sound like nothing but great and grave things, because they were not. They were, more than anything, the ordinary years of a boy growing up in the best place he had ever known, and most of the hours in them were plain and happy and smelled of wood shavings. Harry was small for his age and quick and quiet, and Diagon Alley, which had swallowed him whole one dusk when he was 4, had come, over 3 years, to know him. He was Ollivander's boy, the ward, the foundling cousin. Nobody in the alley knew the name under that, and nobody thought to ask, because a quiet child who fetched and carried for the old wand-maker was the least remarkable thing on the street. Florian Fortescue, 2 doors up, gave him a scoop of ice cream on hot afternoons and would take no coin for it, on the strict condition that Harry guessed the flavor blindfolded, which Harry could nearly always do, though not by any magic, only by paying the kind of attention he paid to everything. The witch at the second-hand bookshop let him sit on the floor in the back and read about dragons for a whole rainy morning, and pretended not to notice. He had a den under the workbench, behind a curtain of hanging wand blanks, where he kept a chipped soldier and a smooth gray stone and 3 of his own bad first attempts at whittling, and where he went when the shop was busy and the noise of strangers pressed too close. For he was still shy of the crowd, still an animal that had been struck too often to be easy among many hands at once, and Ollivander never made him be otherwise. What Ollivander did instead was teach him to make things that were not wands, because a maker, he said, should know the joy of the craft before he ever learns its weight. So Harry learned to whittle. He made a spoon badly, and then a better spoon, and then a little boat that actually floated in the washing-up bowl, and Ollivander kept the first bad spoon on the shelf over the workbench next to his own father's plane, and would not let Harry throw it away, because it is the first thing you made whole with your own hands, and a man should keep the first thing. And on the evenings when the trade had been thin and the day had been kind, the 2 of them would sit at the bench with a lamp between them and whittle nothing in particular, side by side, not talking, the curls of wood gathering on the floor, and Harry, who had spent 4 years learning that silence meant danger, learned in that shop the other kind of silence, the kind that means you are not alone and nothing is wrong and there is nowhere either of you would rather be. He wondered about other children sometimes. He saw them in the alley in the summer, in gangs, laughing, and he watched them the way he had once watched the lit shop windows from outside, with wonder and no envy he could name, and once he asked Ollivander whether he would ever go to school like the one the professor ran, and Ollivander was quiet a moment and then said, "Yes. When you are 11, it is the law and it is right, and I will be sorry every day you are gone and glad every day of the reason." And Harry had not known, until he heard the roughness come into the old voice, that his going was a thing that had a cost in it for somebody, and the knowing of that was one of the warmest things he owned. That summer Ollivander let Harry mend his first wand, and it was the day Harry stopped being only a listener and became, in a small way, a maker. A wand had come in with a loosened heart, an old birch-and unicorn wand, its core worked free of the wood by decades of hard use, so that it rattled faintly when the owner cast, and its magic stuttered like a voice with a catch in it. Ollivander cleared the bench and laid the wand between them under the lamp, and instead of taking up the tools himself, he pushed them across the baize to Harry. "You have read 100 wands," he said. "It is time you spoke back to one. Its heart has come loose of its wood, and the 2 of them can no longer hear each other properly, and it is your hands that are going to introduce them again. I will guide you, but the wand will not answer my hands today. It will answer yours, because you are the one who can hear where it hurts, and a wand mended by a hand that cannot hear where it hurts is a wand mended crooked." Harry's hands were not quite steady on the little gouge. He opened the wand along its old seam the way Ollivander showed him, slow, following the grain and never fighting it, and he felt the birch flinch, and then, when it understood he meant it no harm, ease and let him in. The unicorn hair lay inside, dulled and shifted out of true, and Harry breathed on his cold fingers and lifted it and felt it thrum unhappily against his skin, out of its proper bed, lonely for the wood it had lived beside for 60 years. He did not force it back. He listened for where it wanted to lie, the one seat in all the length of the wand where the hair and the grain would sing the same note, and he found the note low and certain, and he laid the cord down into it, and the birch closed over it with a sigh that went up Harry's arms and into his chest. The mended wand woke under his hands with a small clear cord whole again, and Harry felt the exact instant the wood and the heart found each other after their long estrangement, the exact instant the sentence agreed, and it was, he thought, the best thing he had ever felt, better even than the singing of the shop the night he came, because he had not merely heard this, he had made it. Ollivander looked at the wand, and then at Harry's hands, and then at Harry's face, and he did not say anything clever or deep. He said only, gruffly, "Well, that will do," and turned away to put the tools up, and Harry saw him wipe his eyes on his sleeve and pretend it was the lamp smoke, and Harry said nothing, and wrapped the mended wand in its tissue with the small ceremony, as you lay a sleeping thing down, and set it in its box to wait for its owner. And the wands on the shelves sang all together one soft approving note, welcoming, in their slow wooden way, the newest maker of their kind. The customers meanwhile went on coming, and Harry went on reading them silently from his stool in the corner, and getting better at it, and worse at hiding how good he was becoming. He read them all now without meaning to. It was not that he pried. A wand simply carried its wizard the way a coat carries its wearer's shape, and Harry could no more help reading it than you can help seeing the color of a passing stranger's coat. A gruff apothecary came in to have his son's first wand chosen, and Harry felt off the apothecary's own wand where it rode in his sleeve, a great gentleness he would have been embarrassed to have anyone see, all pointed the wrong way at the world so that it came out as gruffness. And Harry looked at him differently after that, and was kinder to him than the gruffness invited, and the apothecary softened without knowing why. A brisk young ministry which came in to replace a wand snapped in an accident, and Harry felt off the splinters she brought in a handkerchief, that it had not been an accident at all, that she had broken it herself in a rage against a wall and was ashamed. And Harry said nothing, and read in the new wand's eager answer to her hand that she was not a bad person, only a frightened one, and that the wand had already forgiven her, and hoped in its wand way that she would forgive herself. But it was the widower who taught Harry what the reading was for. He came in on a wet afternoon in the spring. Harry was 7.5, an ordinary figure in a good but rain-dark coat, and he did not want a new wand. He wanted his old one seen to. He laid it on the counter, 10 inches of cherry wood gone dull, and said, in the flat, over-controlled voice of someone holding himself together with both hands, that it had stopped working properly, that his spells came out weak and gray, that he had taken it to 2 other makers who could find nothing wrong, and that he had been told at last that if anyone in Britain could find the fault it was Ollivander. Ollivander picked up the cherry wand and turned it in his fingers and held it to the light into his ear, and his face grew grave, and he glanced once at Harry in the corner, a glance that said, "Watch this and learn it," and then he laid the wand back down and looked at the visitor with great and careful kindness. "There is nothing wrong with your wand, sir," Ollivander said. "It is a fine wand, cherry and unicorn, as sound as the day I would have been proud to make it. It is only grieving, as you are." The visitor's controlled face did not change, but something behind it shifted, the way a wall shifts before it comes down. "Unicorn hair remembers being alive," Ollivander went on gently. "It takes its color from the heart that holds it. When that heart is glad, the wand is bright. When that heart is broken, and yours is broken, sir, I am sorry, I can read it in the wood plain as print. The wand breaks a little with it, and mourns alongside its master, and its magic goes gray, because it will not pretend to a joy its wizard has lost. There is no repair for that, because it is not damage, it is loyalty. Your wand grieves with you because it loves you, and it does not know how else to say so." And the visitor, ordinary in his rain-dark coat, put his face down into his hands over the counter and wept silently, his shoulders shaking, for the wife who had died in the winter, and Ollivander stood with him and did not hurry him and did not touch him. And Harry in the corner felt the cherry wand on the counter and felt, coming off it, not weakness at all but the purest love he had ever touched. A wand that had chosen to go dark rather than shine in a world its master could no longer bear to see shining. And Harry understood at 7.5, sitting very still on his stool, what the whole art was for. It was not for power, it was for this. It was for seeing a grief no one else could see, and naming it truly, so that the one carrying it did not have to carry it entirely alone. When the visitor had gone, his grieving wand wrapped again in his handkerchief and Ollivander's counsel in his ears, Ollivander sat down heavily and looked at Harry and said, "Well, what did you feel, love?" said Harry. It was the first time he had used the word for a thing he had read, and he used it plainly because it was plainly what it was. The wand loved him. It went dark on purpose, so he wouldn't be alone in the dark. Ollivander looked at Harry for a long time. "You are 7 years old," he said at last, "and you have just told me a thing about my own craft that took me 60 years to learn. And it frightens me, and I am going to tell you why, because I promised you there would be no hiding in this room." He leaned forward. "A gift like yours is a door. Through it you can see into people, into the truest and most secret part of them, the part they show to no one, because a wand keeps its wizard's true shape whether the wizard wills it or not. You saw that man's love today, and it made you gentle, and that is the gift used as it should be used. But the same door that lets you see a man's love lets you see his fear, his shame, the lock on the box where he keeps the thing he would kill to protect. A person who could read wands as you are learning to read them could find the soft place in anyone alive, and there are people in this world who would give a very great deal to own a boy who could do that, and use him as a housebreaker uses a key. Do you see now why we keep it behind our teeth?" Harry saw. He was beginning that year to see a great many things. Dumbledore came again in the summer Harry was 8, and this time Harry was not sent to the back room. He was old enough now to be trusted at the counter, and Ollivander had begun quietly to let him be seen a little, a foundling ward helping in the shop, exactly the plain, unremarkable child Dumbledore had prescribed. So when the bell fell silent in its particular way and the wands went still along the shelves, Harry was at the counter with a rag and a pot of wax, oiling a set of display wands, and he looked up, and the tall, silver-bearded figure in the doorway was the professor whose wand he had never forgotten. "Harry," said Dumbledore, and his blue eyes went over the child at the counter and took in, with visible and courteous pleasure, how he had grown. "You have shot up. And your sweeping, I am told, has improved beyond all recognition." "A little," said Harry honestly, because it had not improved as much as all that, and Dumbledore laughed, a real laugh, surprised out of him, and some of the great weight he carried lifted from his face for a moment, and showed Harry the young man he must once have been. They talked, Dumbledore and Ollivander, of ordinary things, of the ministry and the school and the price of dragon heartstring, and Dumbledore let Harry stay, and Harry oiled his wands and listened, and all the while the thing in Dumbledore's pocket sang its enormous ancient song, the long red-knotted rope of it, and Harry, who was 4 years better at listening than he had been the last time, heard something in it now that he had not been able to hear at 4, and it troubled him. The way a wrong note in a familiar tune troubles you before you can find which note it is. It was Dumbledore in the end who opened the door, because he had come in part to test exactly this and was too honest to test it dishonestly. "Garrick tells me," he said, setting down his teacup, turning the full blue weight of his attention on Harry, "that you have a very fine ear, that you can hear a wand the way the rest of us hear a voice. I wonder, and you must say no if you would rather not, whether you would tell me what you hear when you listen to mine." The shop went quiet. Ollivander did not move, but Harry felt him become very still, and felt underneath the stillness that his guardian had known this moment would come and had decided on balance to let it, because you cannot hide a boy from the one man sworn to protect him forever, and better the hearing happen here in this room than somewhere with no old wand-maker standing by. "You don't have to keep it in your pocket," Harry said, because that was the first thing, the practical thing. "I can hear it through the pocket." "I could hear it through a wall, could you?" Dumbledore's voice was mild. "Then let us not stand on ceremony." And he drew the wand out and laid it on the counter between them, pale and knobbled and strange, more like a length of blackened root than any shop wand, with swellings along it like the joints of a finger, and Harry looked at it and did not touch it, because you did not touch a proud thing without leave, and this was the proudest thing he had ever stood near. "Elder," Harry said. That was the wood, and it was easy, and he said it to have something easy said. "Elder wood, it's a betraying wood, you taught me. It turns on the ones who aren't ready for it, but this one." He tilted his head. He was reaching into it now, past the wood, into the grammar, into the long knotted verb of the core, and his young face went still and remote the way it did when he was hearing the true thing. "This one's core isn't like a shop wand, it's hair, tail hair, from a horse that wasn't a horse. Something that only lets itself be seen when someone's dying." He did not know the word thestral, and would not for years, but he had felt the thing truly, and Dumbledore's blue eyes flickered. "And the wood and the core agree, they agree really strongly, they've agreed for a long, long time, longer than anything, but they don't agree with you." He said it the way a child says a true thing, without cruelty, without weighing it, simply reporting what was in front of him. "Go on," said Dumbledore, very quietly. All the mildness had gone out of him. Ollivander had put one hand flat on the counter. "The wood and the core agree with each other, but the wand doesn't think it's yours, not really. It thinks it belongs to whoever won it last, that's the rope. All those hands going back and back read where the hands are, every one of them won it, took it off the one before. That's how it decides who it's for, not choosing like the others, winning. And it remembers being won off a man with yellow hair a long time ago by you, and that's the last knot in the rope, that's the newest one." Harry looked up and his forehead creased, because the thing he had to say next was a strange and frightening thing to have to say to a kind old professor. "And it's counting, it's waiting, it thinks the rope isn't finished, it thinks there'll be another knot, it's already listening for whoever's going to win it off you." The silence in the shop was total. Even the wands had stopped their faint singing, all 5,000 of them holding still, listening, the way the whole world seems to hold still in the instant after a great stone has dropped into deep water and before the splash comes up. Dumbledore looked at the pale knobbled wand on the counter a long moment, and his face, which Harry had never been able to find the storm in, showed the storm now briefly far down, the way you see lightning under the horizon of a summer night, no sound to it, only the light. Then he reached out and took up the wand unhurried and returned it to the depth of his robes, and when he looked at Harry again, the blue eyes were composed and warm and unreadable once more, and only Ollivander and only Harry knew what it had cost to make them so. "Thank you, Harry," said Dumbledore. "That was very honestly done. It is not a comfortable thing to hear about a wand one has carried a long time, and you told it to me straight, without dressing it up, which is the only kind of telling worth anything. You are right about it, of course. You are right about all of it. I have known a long time what that wand is and what it waits for, and I carry it precisely because I would rather it wait in my pocket unwon than pass to a hand that would set it working. But I did not know it could be read so nakedly by anyone. And now I know it can by one person, and that changes a number of things I had thought settled." He turned to Ollivander, and the two old men looked at each other over the counter, over the head of the 8-year-old between them, and a great deal passed in the look that Harry could feel and not follow. Guard him, Garrick, Dumbledore said at last softly. Guard him better than you are guarding him. I mean no reproach, you guard him well. But a boy who can do what he has just done is not merely an orphan who must be kept from the wrong sort of attention. He is a thing certain people have hunted for centuries without ever finding because they did not believe he could exist, a true reader of wands. The old books call it a wand friend when they mention it at all, which is seldom, because the last one died before the printing press. If it becomes known that there is a living wand friend in England, there will be men at your door who make your collector of old volumes look like a beggar asking the time. See that it does not become known. And when the day comes that it does, because these things always in the end become known, send to me first, before anyone, swear it. I swore it 4 years ago, said Ollivander. I swear it again. Dumbledore nodded. At the door he paused and looked back at Harry, and the sharpness and the warmth were both in his face at once. Held in a balance, Harry would spend years learning to read. You did nothing wrong today, Dumbledore told him, because he had seen the worry starting in the child, and whatever else he was a man who noticed children. You were asked a question and you answered it truthfully, and truthfully is the only way you should ever answer anyone who deserves an answer at all. But learn, Harry, to know who deserves the answer. I did, most will not. The whole of wisdom in the end is knowing the difference. And he was gone, and the bell was silent, and the wands did not sing until his footsteps had faded, and then they let out their held breath all together in a long rushing chord, and the shop was theirs once more. That night Ollivander did not make cocoa. He made instead a pot of strong tea, the grown-up drink, and poured a little of it for Harry with a great deal of milk, which was a kind of ceremony, a marking that something had changed, that the child had been present at a grown-up thing, and had earned a grown-up's cup, and they sat by the stove in the back room with the shop dark and listening beyond the curtain. I am going to tell you the legend of the wand you read today, Ollivander said, because you have felt the truth of it with your own hands, and a truth felt and not explained is a dangerous thing to leave rattling around in a boy. But I want you to hear it as a legend, a story, and not go looking for it, because the surest way to a bad end is to go looking for that wand, and clever people have been coming to bad ends looking for it since before your Roman soldiers built their roads. And he told him. He told him of the wand of Elder with the Stralhair heart, the death stick, the wand of destiny, the wand that could not be beaten in a duel because it changed its loyalty to whoever beat its master, so that its whole history was a red rope of murder and theft, each owner slain or robbed in his sleep by the next, on and on down the centuries. Because a wand that goes to the winner teaches everyone who holds it that the only way to keep it is to be feared, and the only way to be feared is to be cruel. And the only reward for cruelty is a knife in the dark from someone crueler. He told it as a story in the deep register, and Harry listened with his milky tea going cold in his hands, and understood without being told in so many words that the wand had not stayed a legend, that it was real, that it was in the pocket of the kind old professor who had just left, and that the professor carried it the way you carry a sleeping viper you dare not set down for fear of who might pick it up. Why does he keep it, then, Harry asked, if it only wants to be one off him? If it's only waiting for the next one, why not break it? You could break it, you've broken wands. I could, said Ollivander. He could, and do you know why he does not? Why no one who has ever held that wand and understood it has been able to bring himself to break it? Because to break the death stick you must first master it wholly, love it and own it entire, and no one has ever mastered it who was not, by the end, a little in love with never being beaten. That is the trap in it, Harry. It does not have to make you cruel all at once. It only has to make you afraid to put it down. And the professor is the strongest man I know, and he keeps it in his pocket and does not use it and dares not break it, and that, more than any duel, is the truest measure of what that wand costs the ones who carry it. Remember it. You may need to remember it more than anything I have taught you. Harry turned that over in the firelight, and it settled into the back of his mind with the frost-covered phoenix note and the red rope and all the other things he was keeping there, and then Ollivander leaned forward, and his voice changed, and the second reason came. There are 2 reasons I am glad you read it, he said. The first is that you needed to feel once with your own hands what a wand looks like when its whole loyalty has been won by killing instead of given by love, because now you will always know the difference, and knowing the difference is the beginning of your whole art. The second, he looked at Harry across the embers, and his silver eyes were grave. The second is that a man is going to come one day who is looking for exactly what you felt this evening. Not for that wand, perhaps, that one is beyond his reach in the safest pocket in Britain, but for the principle of it, for the secret of the unbeatable wand, the wand that cannot be turned against its master, the wand that ends the red rope and keeps a man on top of it forever. Men have hunted that secret as long as there have been wands, and everyone has believed he was the one clever enough to find it, and everyone has been wrong because the secret does not exist. There's no unbeatable wand, there's only Elder, which is honest about the cost. But a man who believes the secret exists, and who hears that there's a boy in a wand shop who can read the deepest grammar of the craft, a boy who might be made to find for him what no book will teach. Ollivander stopped. He set down his tea. That man has already written to me 3 times in a hand I know, and he is patient, and he is coming closer. And when he comes, you and I must be ready, and being ready begins tonight, with you understanding exactly what he wants and exactly why he must never, ever have it. Harry sat in the firelight with his cold tea and looked at the wandmaker who had become his whole world, and felt the shape of the future press against the walls of the warm little room like weather against a window, and he did not name what he felt, because he had learned not to. But he moved a little nearer along the bench until his shoulder was against Ollivander's arm, and Ollivander put the arm around him, and they sat like that a long while, the wandmaker and the wand friend, the last of an art and the first of a thing the art had waited 1,000 years to produce, while beyond the curtain 5,000 wands kept their patient watch, and far off in the dark a hand that had written 3 careful letters folded a 4th, and did not send it yet, and waited. Because it had learned in a long and bitter life that the patient hand is the one that wins. Chapter 3 and Chapter 4. Visitors and shadows. Harry was 9 the first time Emeric Vane came to the shop, and he answered the bell himself, because by then the bell was partly his. 2 years had smoothed him into the life of the place. He was tall for 9 now, wiry, with his father's untidy black hair and his mother's green eyes behind a pair of spectacles. Ollivander had taken him to be fitted for the winter he turned 8, when it came out that the child who could hear a wand across a wall had been squinting at the account book for a year and saying nothing. He worked the counter for the ordinary trade, the ink and the wand polish and the spare dragonhide gloves, and he wrapped and boxed, and he had learned to talk to customers in a plain, friendly way that gave nothing away, a shopkeeper's voice laid over a wand friend's ear. Ollivander still did the choosing. That theater would always be his. But he let Harry stand nearer the stage each year, and Harry stood there and heard the endings coming and kept his face still, and only in the gray mornings and the deep work did the two of them speak of what he truly was. They were good years, the 9th and the 10th, whatever came into them at the end. Harry had a whole street for a home by then. He knew which cobbles rocked and which of the alley's cats would suffer themselves to be carried. He ran errands to the apothecary and the parchment seller and was given at each the grave, courteous welcome the alley reserves for a child it has decided is one of its own. Florian Fortescue had promoted him from guessing flavors to inventing them, and there was, for one glorious summer, a sundae on the board called the Ollivander, which was cocoa and cinder toffee, and which Harry had designed. And in the evenings there was still the bench, and the lamp, and the curls of shaving gathering on the floor, and the wandmaker and the child whittling nothing side by side in the good silence. And Harry, who had come out of a cupboard with nothing, would sometimes stop in the middle of an ordinary afternoon and feel the size of what he had, and have to go and be busy with something so as not to be undone by it. But there was a shadow over those years, and it had a handwriting. The collector had written twice more. The 4th letter came at midsummer and the 5th at the turn of the following spring, and each was politer than the last, and each named a higher price, and each went into the locked drawer with the others, unanswered, and Ollivander's face when he filed them grew a little more closed each time. He had stopped saying the dangerous men can wait. He had begun instead to do small, quiet things, to check the shop's old locks at night with his hand flat on the wood, feeling the wards under the paint, to move certain boxes from the front shelves to the deep stores behind the workshop, to teach Harry, without ever quite saying why, where the true stock was kept and where the false stock sat that a thief might take and think he had won something. Harry noticed all of it because Harry noticed everything, and he did not ask, because he had learned that his guardian told him things when the telling would help and kept them close when it would only frighten, and he trusted the difference. So when the bell rang on a gray afternoon in the autumn, Harry was 9, and he looked up from the counter and saw the figure standing in the doorway. He felt, before he had taken in a single feature, the wands go quiet along the shelves in a way he had felt only twice before, the way they went quiet for Dumbledore, and he understood at once that the person in the doorway was not ordinary, and his hand found the edge of the counter and held it. Emeric Vane was tall and spare and gray, dressed in a long gray traveling coat cut close and old-fashioned, and he was perhaps 60, with a lined ascetic face and pale eyes and gray hair combed straight back from a high forehead, and he wore on his right hand a glove of black kid leather, while his left hand was bare. He stood in the doorway and let the door close behind him and looked around the shop slowly, appraising, the way you look at a room you intend one day to own, and then his pale eyes came down and found the child behind the counter and rested there a moment too long and moved on. "Good afternoon," said Vane. His voice was quiet and level and precise, each word set down separately like a coin counted onto a table. "Is the proprietor at home, Mr. Ollivander? I have corresponded with him. I should like, if it is convenient, to speak with him in person." Harry had by now heard a great many wands, and he had thought he had heard most of the kinds there were. He had not heard one like the wand in Emeric Vane's left sleeve. It came to him wrong the moment Vane crossed the threshold, and it took Harry a few seconds to understand what the wrongness was, because he had never felt it before. The wood was pear. He knew pear, it was a warm wood, a generous wood, a wood that chose the kindly and the wise, and it was, Ollivander had told him, the one wood in all the stores that had never once in living memory been found in the hand of a cruel wizard, so faithful was it to gentleness. That was the wood, and laid over the wood, forced through it, strained through its warm generous grain like acid through a cloth, was cruelty, years of it. The wand had been made to do things it was made to refuse, curse work and worse, and it had not been able to stop them because it was not this man's wand. It had never chosen him. He held it by force and it knew it, and the whole length of it was screaming silently, a note of such wrongness and such exhaustion that Harry felt his own eyes sting to hear it, a good thing being made to be a bad thing on for years with no rest and no escape. And it was loose. Under the screaming, under the forced cruelty, the allegiance of the wand had come unmoored the way a boat comes unmoored in a slow tide, so gradually that the hand holding the rope had not felt it go. It did not belong to Americ Vane. It was only in his hand, and a part of it deep down was waiting, the way the elder wand waited, for someone to end its bondage, though it did not know how that ending would come. Harry took all of this in the space of 3 breaths, standing at the counter with his hand gripping the edge, and he did the thing Ollivander had drilled into him for 5 years. He put his face into the plain, friendly shopkeeper's shape and kept it there, though it cost him more than it ever had, and he said, "I'll fetch him, sir," and went through the curtain into the workshop, where Ollivander was already standing very still, having heard the wands go quiet, having known before Harry told him exactly who had come. "Stay at the counter," Ollivander said, low and fast, gripping Harry's shoulder. "If I send you away he will note it, and a child sent away is a child worth taking. Be my dull shop boy, say nothing, read him if you can bear to, and keep your face plain, and no matter how much it hurts you, you will not show it. Can you do that?" "His wand," Harry whispered. "Garrick, his wand is, I know what his wand is." Ollivander's silver eyes were terrible. "I made it 40 years ago for a good wizard who died in the First War, and this creature took it off the body and has been torturing it ever since." "Yes, I know, stand at the counter, go." They went out together, the wandmaker unhurried and courteous, Harry plain and quiet at his shoulder, and Americ Vane inclined his grey head. "Mr. Ollivander," Vane said, "you have not answered my letters." "I answer the letters I mean to say yes to," said Ollivander pleasantly, "and I do not trouble a busy man with the others. You have had my no 5 times, Mr. Vane, it has not changed. The library is not for sale, and the cores are not for sale, and I am too old to be flattered by a 6th price. I did not come to raise the price." Vane moved into the shop unhurried, and his pale eyes went along the shelves, reading them, counting them. "I came because letters are a poor way to take the measure of a man, and I find I had taken yours wrongly. I had thought you a merchant who wished to be haggled with. I see now that you are something rarer, a keeper." He said the word with a curious weight. "You keep things, Mr. Ollivander, knowledge chiefly. The old knowledge, the deep grammar, the art the rest of the trade has let fall. I have spent my life gathering the scattered leaves of that art from every corner of the earth, and I have gathered a great many, and I had believed myself, until recently, its foremost living student. And then I heard a rumor that the whole living tree of it, root and branch, still stood in one shop in Diagon Alley in the hands of one old man, and that he had no heir, and that when he died it would die with him, unwritten, unshared, gone." Vane turned his pale eyes on Ollivander. "That would be a tragedy, sir, a crime against the craft. I offer not to buy your knowledge, but to receive it, to be your student, to carry the tree on when you are gone. Surely that is a thing a keeper wants above all others, not to be the last." It was, Harry thought, a very clever thing to say, because it was almost true, because being the last was the exact fear Ollivander had carried for 100 years, the fear Harry himself had cured. And he watched Ollivander weigh it, and watched Vane watch Ollivander weigh it, and understood that this was a duel, fought with courtesies, and that his guardian was in it alone, and that he must not, whatever happened, give his guardian away by so much as a flicker. "You flatter the art and insult the artist," Ollivander said at length mildly. "You have studied the leaves, you say, I believe you. But the leaves are not the tree, Mr. Vane, and a man who has spent his life gathering scattered leaves has spent it, forgive me, gathering the parts of the craft that could be torn off and carried away, which are precisely the parts that do not matter. The grammar cannot be torn off and carried. It is not a thing to be collected. It is a way of listening, and it is learned in 40 years at a bench by a person the wood consents to teach, and the wood does not consent to teach everyone." He paused, and something cool came into his voice. "It would not consent to teach you. I can tell you that without unkindness, as a matter of plain fact, the way I would tell you your wand was pear. The wood will not open to a hand it does not trust, and there is not a plank in this shop that trusts you, Mr. Vane, and they are, I have found, excellent judges." The courtesy did not leave Vane's face, but something moved behind the pale eyes, cold and patient and old, and his gloved right hand closed slowly at his side, and Harry, reading, felt the pear wand in his sleeve flare with the wrongness of its master's anger, a warm wood forced to burn. "The wood does not trust me," Vane repeated softly. "How interesting that you should put it so, as though the wood had a will of its own and chose its master and could refuse." His pale gaze slid for just a moment to Harry at the counter and away, and Harry oiled a wand he had already oiled and felt the weight of that glance go across him like a cold draught. Do you know, Mr. Ollivander, I have heard it said that in the very oldest days there were wizards who could hear the will of the wood directly. Wand friends, the old texts call them. It was thought they had died out. It would be a remarkable thing, would it not, if one were found? A person who could hear what the wood chooses. Who could hear, for instance, whether a wand's loyalty had come loose of its holder. He let the words fall separately, watching Ollivander's face, watching with the very edge of his attention the child's. Such a person would be worth more than any library to the right keeper. The shop was silent. Ollivander's face gave nothing, and Harry, with an effort that left him shaking inside his still plain outside, gave nothing either and did not look up. "There are no wand friends, Mr. Vane," said Ollivander, and his voice was flat and final and closed the subject like a coffin lid. "They died out, you said so yourself. Now, I have a shop to keep and you have had your answer for the 6th time. I will see you to the door." Vane let himself be seen to the door. At the threshold he paused and looked back, and his pale eyes went one last time around the quiet shop, the shelves, the wandmaker, the child, storing it, mapping it, the way a man maps a house he means to enter again by another door. "You are very sure of your locks, Mr. Ollivander," he said, "and of your wood's good judgment. I hope, for the sake of the art, that both are as strong as you believe. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, boy." And he was gone into the grey street, and the bell fell silent behind him, and the wands did not sing for a long time, and when they finally did it was not the relieved chord they sang after Dumbledore, but a low, uneasy murmur, like a wood after a hunter has passed through and not yet gone far enough away. Ollivander locked the door and turned the sign and stood with his forehead against the wood a moment. Then he straightened and looked at Harry, and Harry looked back, and neither of them pretended it had been nothing. "You read his wand," said Ollivander. "It's a good wand," Harry said, and his voice cracked because he had held the plainness so long and it broke now all at once. "It's a good wand and he's hurting it. It didn't choose him. He took it off the wizard you made it for, the one who died, and it's been screaming for 40 years and it can't stop and it's coming loose and he doesn't even know. Why does he want the unbeatable wand so badly? I felt it under everything. He's not just greedy for it. He's scared. He's so scared, Garrick. Why is a man like that scared?" Ollivander crossed the shop and knelt and took Harry by both shoulders. "Because," he said, "a man who holds a wand that does not love him lives every single day in terror of the day it turns on him." Emeric Vane took his power by force, the way the holders of the Elder Wand take theirs, and force is a debt, Harry, and the wand is the creditor, and it is always, always coming to collect. He knows his pear wand is loose. Not with his mind, he has not your ear, but in his bones he knows it, the way you know a tooth is going before it aches. And so he hunts and has hunted his whole life for a wand that could never come loose, never turn, never be won away, a wand that would let him stop being afraid. That is what the unbeatable wand means to a man like that, not glory, rest. He wants to put down a fear he has carried for 40 years, and he thinks the secret of my craft will let him, and he is willing to do anything at all to get it. He looked hard into Harry's face. "And now he has stood in my shop and heard me say wand friends died out, and watched a boy at the counter go carefully blank while he said the word, and I cannot tell you, Harry, whether he believed me. That is the thing we must live with now. We do not know whether he believed me." That night Ollivander did a thing he had never done before. He took Harry, after the shop was dark, down the narrow stairs behind the workshop that Harry had always been forbidden, into the deep cellar where the true stores were, the oldest cores and the rarest woods, and in an iron press bolted to the stone, the Ollivander books. They were not many. That was the first thing that surprised Harry, who had imagined, from the way his guardian spoke of them, a great library. There were perhaps 30 volumes, some no thicker than a pamphlet, bound in cracked leather and vellum, and one of them in something pale and fine that Harry did not ask about, and they were chained to the press the way the books at the bookshop were chained to their shelves, but with older, heavier chains. "Everything I have taught you until now," Ollivander said, unlocking the press, "is in your hands and your ear, where it belongs and where no thief can take it. But there are things that are not in me any longer to teach, because I learned them once and put them away and hoped never to need them, and let them go a little dim on purpose. Vane has made me need them again. So we are going to wake them up, you and I, together, because I think you are ready, and because I would rather you learn them from me slowly with love than have them torn out of you some worse way." He drew out the palest of the books and laid it on the reading stand. "This is the oldest thing my family owns. It is about allegiance, not the trade version, the winning and the choosing that any wandmaker knows, the deep version. How a wand's loyalty is truly bound, and how it truly comes loose, and what a person who can hear the loosening might in the last extremity do about it." And through that winter in the deep cellar by candlelight they read. Harry learned things there that changed the shape of everything he knew. He learned that a wand's allegiance was not one thing but three, braided together like the strands of a rope. There was the bond of choosing, when a wand takes a wizard freely at the first meeting, the ordinary miracle of the shop. There was the bond of conquest, when a wand is won by defeat, the elder wand's cold and brittle way, strong as iron and fragile as iron, because it is built on fear, and fear can always be outmatched by a greater fear. And there was the bond of faith, the slow, deep third strand, which grows over years according to whether a wizard uses the wand true to its nature, and which cannot be broken by force because it is not held by force. It can only be starved by a wizard who forces the wand against its temper until it withers and the wand comes loose. Harry read this last part 3 times and thought of the pear wand screaming in Emeric Vane's sleeve, and understood that he was reading the story of that exact wand and why it was loose, and he felt the whole winter's lesson bend toward a single point like light through a glass. And on a night deep in that winter, in the palest and oldest book, in a hand so old the letters had shapes Harry had to be taught, they came to the thing Ollivander had been circling for 5 years. Every wand has a name, Ollivander read, his voice gone down into the register that made the candle flame stand still, and it is not the name we give it in the ledger, the wood and the core and the inches. It is one note, the whole of the wand fused into a single sound, the wood and the heart and the long history of its hands all sung at once, and it is different for every wand that has ever been made, as a face is different, and it cannot be written down, and it cannot be taught, and it can only be heard, and only by one kind of listener. He looked up at Harry over the book. That note is the wand's true name, and a wand friend hearing it can speak it back. Do you understand what that means, Harry? To speak a thing's true name is to call it. A wand friend who hears a wand's true name and speaks it truly with a hand the wand can trust can call that wand across a room, can turn it from a wielder who has broken faith with it, can wake it in its deepest temper to refuse the hand that holds it and answer the one that named it. The cellar was very still. Harry could hear his own blood. It has been done 4 times in all recorded history, Ollivander said quietly, and each time by a wand friend in the last extremity, against a tyrant holding a wand he had forced. Each time the wand was called home, and the tyrant fell not by a curse, but by his own weapon, remembering what it was and declining at the last to be his. And each time the books are careful to say the same warning, so hear it now and keep it. He turned the ancient page. It cannot be done to a wand that is truly its holder's. A wand bound by honest choosing or grown into faith over long good years will not hear you when you speak its name, because it is not listening for rescue, it is content, it is home. The true name only calls a wand that wants to come. It only works on a wand that is loose, held by force, faith starved out of it, waiting, though it does not know for what. And there is only one such wand, Harry, within 100 miles of the shop. The pear wand, Harry whispered, in Vane's sleeve. The pear wand in Vane's sleeve. Ollivander closed the pale book and looked at Harry across the candle, and his silver eyes were grave past anything Harry had seen in them. I am not teaching you this by accident, and I will not pretend to you that I am. I am an old man, and Vane is patient and strong and coming closer, and if the day should come that he takes what he wants by force, and it comes down to the 2 of us alone against him in a room, then you and not I will be the only weapon there that can touch him. Not my holly wand, not any spell I know. Your ear, the one thing in all the world his stolen wand is listening for, and I will not send you into that day unarmed and unknowing. So you will learn the true name listening this winter from me in this cellar, the way the 4 wand friends before you learned it, and I pray to every wood on these shelves that you never once have to use it. Harry was 10 that winter, and he understood, and he was afraid, and it was the one fear he let himself name that whole year, aloud that night in the cellar with the true name of wands laid open before him. He told Ollivander that he was afraid, and Ollivander did not tell him not to be. He said only, good, a boy who is not afraid of Emeric Vane has not understood him. We will be afraid together, and we will be ready together, and being ready is the cure for the worst of the fear. Come, it is very late, and there is cocoa upstairs, and the books have said enough for one night. So the winter turned into a thing with 2 faces. By day the shop was itself, warm and busy, cocoa and customers and the ordinary trade, and in the deep mornings and on the long dark evenings when the shutters were up, Harry learned to reach for the true name of a wand and hold it, the way you learn to hold a single voice in a choir. He practiced on the shop's own stock gently with their leave, and found that most wands would not give him their true name at all, because they were content and had no reason to. A well-chosen wand keeps its true name to itself the way a happy person keeps their secrets out of fullness, not fear. Only a wand in trouble, a wand mismade or misused or grieving, would let the note come up to him, and even then it came shyly, and he learned to be tender with it, to ask and never to take, because a true name taken by force, Ollivander warned him, would burn the taker. It was a thing that could only be given and could only be received by love, and that was the whole safety of it, and the whole terror, because it meant the only person who could ever wield it was a person who could not be made to. And once, near the end of that winter, running an errand up the alley in the blue dusk, Harry saw Emeric Vane. He was standing across the street, in the mouth of the alley beside the apothecary, grey and still in his grey coat, not shopping, not moving, simply watching the front of Ollivander's with his pale, patient eyes, and Harry, with a parcel under his arm and his heart going, made himself walk on at an ordinary pace and not look twice, and go into the parchment cellars and buy the thing he had been sent for and come out again, and when he came out Vane was gone. He told Ollivander. Ollivander said nothing for a moment, and then he checked the locks, all of them, with his hand flat on the wood, and that night he moved the pale oldest book from the iron press into a hiding place that even Harry was not shown, and Harry understood that the waiting part of the story was ending, and the other part was about to begin. The 3 weeks between were the longest Harry had known since the cupboard, and they were long in the same way, awaiting for a blow whose falling he could not fix in time, only feel coming. He slept badly. He would wake in the black hours with the sense that the shop had drawn breath, and lie listening until the wands settled, and sometimes he would pad out to the workshop and find Ollivander already there, awake too, sitting by the bank stove with the holly wand across his knees, and they would not speak. Harry would only fetch his blanket and curl in the chair opposite, and the two of them would keep the watch together, and it was, in its strange way, among the closest the two of them ever were. By day Ollivander made them ready. He walked Harry through the shop like a general walking a fort, showing him the ways out he had never mentioned in 6 years. The loose panel behind the third shelf that gave onto the roofs, the coal-hole bolt and how it could be barred from within, the old bell-pull in the cellar that rang, by some working older than the telephone, in a certain office at a certain school. "If it goes wrong," Ollivander said over and over until Harry could have said it in his sleep, "you do not fight for me. You pull that bell and you go through that panel and you run and you find the professor and you tell him everything. You are not to spend yourself defending an old man who has had 90 good years. You are to live, swear it." And Harry swore it every time, and neither of them believed for a moment that he would keep it, and both of them let the lie stand, because it was a kind of love to tell it. A note came from Dumbledore in the second week, brought by a bird Harry did not recognize, grey and quick, and Ollivander read it and put it in the fire, which he did not do with Vane's letters, and told Harry only that the professor was watching what could be watched, that Emeric Vane had done nothing the law could touch, that a man might buy up old books and stand in an alley of a winter evening and break no rule doing it, and that until Vane reached, they could only wait and be ready. "He knows," Ollivander said, meaning the professor. "That is the thing that matters. He knows, and he is near, and if the worst comes he will come. But he cannot live in my shop, Harry, and Vane knows that too, and Vane is counting on the space between the professor's knowing and the professor's coming. That space is where men like him do their work." And in that space Harry practiced every night until his ear ached, reaching for the true name of the shop's most troubled wands, holding it, letting it go, learning the shape of the listening the way a swimmer learns to hold his breath a stroke longer each day. He did not tell Ollivander how often, in the practicing, his mind went out past the shop's own wands to the one wand he most needed and least wanted to hear, the pear wand, screaming somewhere in the grey dark of the city, coming looser by the week, and how each time he pulled himself back, because to reach for that one now before the hour would be to warn it, and to warn it would be to warn the hand that held it. He kept it behind his teeth, even from himself, and waited, and the shop waited with him, and the year wound down toward its darkest night. It began 3 weeks later, on the darkest night of the year, and Vane did not come himself. Harry woke because the wands woke him. He came up out of sleep into the black hour before dawn with the whole shop screaming in his ears, not aloud in the other way, 5,000 wands all crying the same alarm at once, and he was out of bed and had Ollivander by the arm before he was properly awake, and Ollivander was already up, already reaching for his own wand, holly and dragon heartstring, 13 inches, that Harry had never once seen him draw. "The coal hole," Ollivander breathed. "They have come in through the coal hole into the cellar, 2 of them, not him, hirelings, behind me, and do exactly as I say, and if I tell you to run you will run and not argue, do you hear me? Once in your life you will not argue." They came out into the workshop in the dark, and Harry heard the intruders below in the deep cellar, the scrape of the iron press, the low, fast voices of men working against the clock, and he understood what was happening with a cold clarity that surprised him. They had not come for gold, they had come for the books and the true cores. They had come for exactly the knowledge Vane had been refused while the shop slept, and if Harry had not been a wand friend, if the wands had not woken him, they would have been gone before dawn with the stolen art under a black coat and no one the wiser. "They know where the true stores are," Harry breathed. "Someone told them, or he worked it out. They'll take the cellar, then we do not let them," Ollivander said, and started for the stairs, and Harry caught his sleeve and held it hard. "No, wait, let me. It's the thing you taught me for, let me." And Harry did the thing the whole winter had been for. He knelt on the workshop floor and put both his hands flat on the boards, the way he had pressed his cheek to the cupboard pine a lifetime ago, and he reached down through the floor into the wood of the press and the wood of the shelves and the ancient wood of the shop's own bones, and he found the blackthorn. There was a rack of blackthorn in the deep stores, warrior's wood, a whole rack of it, hard and dark, loyal, Ollivander had told him 5 years before, only to a wizard who had walked through fire, and asleep all this while because no such wizard had come. Harry could not walk through fire. But he could hear the blackthorn, and he could speak to it in the true grammar under words, and he told it, not commanded, told it and asked it, that fire had come to the shop at last, that men were in its cellar meaning to carry it and its brothers off into the dark to be forced and sold and broken, and that a child of the shop, a child the wood had known since he was 4, was asking it please to wake. And the blackthorn woke. Harry felt it go through the floor like a current, the whole rack of warriors' wood coming awake at once in the dark below, and then every other wood in the cellar catching it, the way the pine had caught the note in the walls of Privet Drive and passed it plank to plank, until the entire deep store of Ollivanders was awake and moving, and the 2 intruders cried out once in the dark, as 500 lengths of loyal wood rose off their racks and turned on them. Harry did not see it. He felt it on his knees on the workshop floor with his palms flat on the boards, and Ollivander standing over him with the holly wand raised, felt the wands drive the thieves back from the press and up the cellar stairs and across the workshop, not striking them, only hurting, a wall of shivering wood closing on them from every side, a low furious rushing like a river in flood, until the 2 men were falling over each other in their haste to reach the coal hole they had come in by, and then they were gone. Up and out into the night, empty-handed, and behind them the shop's whole worth of wood settled back onto its racks with a great slow exhalation, and the alarm went out of the shelves note by note, and the shop was quiet and safe and theirs. The silence after was enormous. Harry sat back on his heels, shaking, wrung out, his hands gone numb to the wrist, and Ollivander knelt down beside him and gathered him in without a word and held him. And Harry felt the old heart going too fast against his ear, and understood that his guardian had been every bit as frightened as he was, more, because Ollivander had been frightened not for himself but for Harry, and had stood over him with the holly wand ready to put his old body between the child and 2 grown men in the dark. And would have done it and would not have hesitated. They did not sleep again that night. They sat in the workshop as the gray dawn came up, wrapped in one blanket between them, drinking cocoa neither of them tasted, and the wands murmured around them, unsettled, watchful, and at last Ollivander began, without being asked, to tell Harry the thing he had never told him, the thing that lived behind the 100 years of solitude, because the night had opened something in him and he found for once that he wanted not to keep it. He had had a brother once. A younger brother, gentler than himself, less gifted at the deep art but the better maker of the 2 by ordinary measures, and the 2 of them had run the shop together in their youth, and it had been the best time of Garrick Ollivander's long life, and he had not known how good it was until it was gone. And a man had come in those days too, a collector, a gatherer of the old scattered leaves, and Ollivander's brother, who was trusting where Garrick was wary, had befriended him, had shown him things, had believed the flattery about carrying the art on. And the collector had wanted more than the brother would freely give, and had come one night to take it, and there had been a fire, and when it was out the brother was dead, and the oldest books were saved only because Garrick, in his wariness, had already moved them to a cellar the collector did not know existed. And Garrick Ollivander had buried his brother and closed his heart and lived alone for 80 years, keeping the art safe by keeping every living soul away from it, letting it dim, letting himself dim, resolved that no one he loved would ever again be killed for what the shop held. And then Ollivander said in the gray dawn, looking at Harry, a 4-year-old walked in out of the cold with his mother's eyes and woke every wand in the alley, and I had to choose all over again between keeping the art safe and keeping a heart, and I chose the heart. I chose you with my eyes open, knowing exactly what it might one day cost, because 80 years alone had taught me that an art kept safe by keeping everyone away from it is not kept safe at all. It is only kept dead. You have made it live again, Harry. Whatever Vane does, whatever comes, you have already made it live again, and that was worth the risk the day I took it, and it is worth the risk this morning, and I will not have you thinking when you are afraid in the dark that you are a danger to me. You are the reason there is anything left in this shop worth defending. Do you hear me? You are not the danger, you are the whole of what is worth keeping. Harry heard him. He was 10 years old, and he had woken 500 wands with his bare hands in the dark, and he had heard, at last, the shape of the grief his guardian had carried for 80 years. And he leaned into Ollivander's side under the shared blanket as the dawn came up gray and cold over Diagon Alley, and he made himself a promise he did not say aloud, a promise about Emeric Vane and the shop and the one who had become his father in everything but the word and the wands. Hearing the shape of the promise in him, though he had not spoken it, murmured their slow wooden approval into the coming day, and did not for once sound afraid. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5. The hollow and the core in the spring. Harry was 10 going on 11. Ollivander began to teach him as a man teaches who knows his time is short, not because he was dying, but because Harry was leaving. The Hogwarts letter would come at the end of July. They both knew it. It had been coming for 11 years, since a night in a ruined cottage neither of them spoke of, and it would come by owl on a summer morning with a green-inked address, and Harry would go in September to the castle in the north to learn the ordinary magic that ordinary wizards learned, and he would be gone for the greater part of every year after, and the shop would be quiet again in a way it had not been quiet since he was 4. Ollivander did not grieve about it where Harry could see. He had decided, privately, that the going was right, and that a boy raised among 5,000 wands and no other children needed the castle more than the castle would ever know it needed him. But he had also decided that there were things Harry must carry north with him that no professor in Scotland could give, and that the spring and the summer were all the time left to give them, and so he taught that season, with a kind of controlled urgency, pouring 90 years down into a boy as fast as the child could hold it. "You can read a wand better than any living soul," Ollivander said on the first morning of it, "and you can mend one, and you have learned, this winter, the last and gravest secret of the reading which I pray you never use, but you have never made one. And a wand-maker who cannot make is only half a wand-maker, a scholar of a thing he cannot do, and I will not send you out into the world half of what you are. Before you go north, Harry, you are going to make a wand, with your own hands. From the living wood to the beating heart, and I am going to show you how it is truly done, which is a thing perhaps 6 people alive have seen, because the trade makes wands now the way a factory makes shoes, and has forgotten that it was ever anything else." He cleared the great workbench that spring as he had never cleared it, and he brought up from the deep cellar things Harry had never seen. The long knives with edges that sang, the seasoning oils in their dark bottles, the little crucibles for the seeding of a core, and a set of measuring rods older than the shop, marked in units that had no name in any modern tongue. And he taught Harry the making, over weeks, in the grey mornings, and it was the most beautiful thing Harry had ever been shown. For the making of a wand, Ollivander taught him, was not a manufacture but a courtship and a marriage, and it could no more be hurried than either. First the wood had to be chosen, and not chosen by the maker at all, but by the wood, which meant a wand-maker who wished to make a true wand must first go to the trees, and stand among them, and wait, sometimes for days, until a tree consented to give a branch, and no true wand had ever been cut from a tree that did not consent, because a branch taken by force made a wand that hated its own life. Then the wood must be seasoned, dried slow over years, never forced, because a wood dried too fast cracked in the soul where the eye could not see, and would fail its wizard on the one day that mattered. Then the core must be found that agreed with the wood, and this was the deep art, the reading turned to making, for a maker had to hear whether a given heart and a given wood would sing the same note or war forever, and most pairings warred, and the maker's whole skill was in the patient trying of heart against wood over and over, until two were found that, laid together, sighed and settled, and became willing to be one thing. And then only then came the shaping, the long slow marriage of the two, the seeding of the core down the hollow of the wood, the binding, the oiling, the waiting, until one morning the maker lifted the finished thing off the bench and felt it, for the first time, no longer two things consenting to lie together, but one thing whole, alive, waiting only for the hand it would spend its life belonging to. "That is why I remember every wand," Ollivander said, holding up an unfinished blank to the grey light. "People think it is a trick of memory, an old man's boast. It is nothing of the kind. I remember every wand because I did not make them. I married them, each pair, wood and heart, with my own hands, over weeks, over months, and you do not forget a marriage you have made. Every wand in this shop is a marriage I performed, standing where you're standing, and when one of them chooses a wizard at last and goes out that door in a boy's trembling hand, it is a daughter leaving home, and I feel it every time the way a father feels it, and that is the whole secret of my craft that the trade has forgotten, Harry, that it is not made of skill. It is made of love. The skill is only how the love gets into the wood." Harry learned it all that spring with the whole of himself, and grew, in the learning, older than his years and younger than his years at once. Older because no 11-year-old should have known what he knew, younger because in the deep work he was still, always, the child who had pressed his cheek to the pine, and the wood knew him as that child and taught him as that child, freely, holding nothing back. And then on a grey morning in May, Ollivander climbed the ladder to the high left-hand shelf, to the place Harry's eyes had gone 1,000 times without his knowing why, and he brought down the box that had rattled on the night Harry came, and he set it on the cleared bench between them, and he said, "It is time you met the wand that has been waiting for you since before you were born." Harry looked at the box. It was old, the cardboard gone soft and grey, and it was, he realized, the only box in the whole shop that he had never once been allowed to touch, never dusted, never moved, and he had never questioned it, the way you never question the one closed door in a house you love. And now it lay on the bench, and inside it something was singing, a note Harry knew, a note he had heard before on the very night he came, the loudest voice in all that first singing, and he understood, with the slow gathering certainty of a thing you have always half known, that this was the wand whose box had rattled while he drank his cocoa. This was the wand Ollivander had hushed and told not yet. This was the thing the whole shop had woken to greet when a 4-year-old crossed the threshold in a coat that did not fit. "Open it," said Ollivander very gently. "You have leave. You have had leave for 11 years. The wand gave it the night you came. Only I withheld it until you were ready. Open it now." Harry lifted the lid. Inside, on faded purple velvet, lay a wand of holly, 11 inches, pale and straight and plain, and the moment the lid came off it blazed up to meet him, not with sparks, with recognition, a warmth that ran up his arms and into his chest and filled the whole of him with a note so pure and so glad and so entirely his that his eyes flooded, and he did not try to stop them. Because there was no name for the thing he felt except that it was the other half of a sentence he had been trying to say his whole life, and here at last was the word that finished it. He did not pick the wand up. He understood without being told that he must not yet, that this meeting was not the taking, that the taking would come at its proper hour. But he laid one finger against the holly, the way he had laid one finger on the wood blanks when he was 4, and the wand pressed back against his finger like a dog leaning into a hand it has waited its whole life to be touched by. And Harry, kneeling at the bench, understood that he had been chosen long ago before he could remember, and had spent every day since being quietly, patiently loved by a piece of wood on a high shelf that had never once given up on him coming. "Holly and phoenix feather," Ollivander said softly. 11 inches, nice and supple. I made it the year before you were born, Harry, and I did not know, when I married that wood to that heart, why I could not sell it, why every hand that reached for it in 11 years was the wrong hand, why it turned every buyer away and waited and would not say for what. I know now. It was waiting for you. It has always been waiting for you. But that is not the whole of the story, and the rest of the story is the hardest thing I will ever tell you, and I am going to tell it to you now this morning before the world tells it to you worse, because you are almost 11 and you are about to go out into a world that knows your name, and you must not go out into it not knowing the truth of your own life. Will you hear it?" Harry took his finger from the wand and folded his hands in his lap and said yes. "The phoenix that gave the feather in your wand," Ollivander said, "is a real bird living, and I know its keeper, and its keeper is the professor who has come to this shop 3 times to look at you. Its name is Fox. And once 11 years and a little more ago, that phoenix gave 2 feathers, the only 2 it has ever given, and I made 2 wands, one from each, the only brother wands I have ever made with my own hands. One of them is the holly wand in that box, which chose to wait for you. And the other," he paused, and his voice went down into the deep register, and the shop went still to hear it. "The other is you, 13.5 inches, and I sold it 50 years ago to a clever, hungry boy who grew into the most terrible wizard of the age, and it did terrible things in his hand for 50 years. And on the last night of October, 11 years ago, he carried it to a cottage in the West Country, and he killed a man named James Potter with it, and then a woman named Lily Potter, who had been my customer, Willow and Unicorn, who died with her arms around her son. And then he turned that wand on the son, on a child of 15 months, and he spoke the curse that ends everything, the curse that has no counter, the curse that had never once failed him. And the curse failed. Harry did not move. He had known in outline that his parents were dead, that they had been killed. Ollivander had told him that much years ago, carefully in the plainest words, as much of the truth as a small child could hold. But he had never had the shape of it, the wand, the cottage, the arms around him, and he sat now and took the shape of it into himself, and the room was very quiet, and the holly wand in its box hummed low and steady, as though it were holding his hand. "It failed," Ollivander said, "and no one living wholly understands why, and I will not pretend to you that I do. Some of it was your mother. She died to save you freely, and there is an old magic in that, the oldest and least understood, a shelter written in love and sealed in blood, and it turned the curse. And some of it, Harry, some small part of it, I have always believed, was the wands. Because the wand and the holly wand are brothers, one divided heart, and I do not think a piece of fox could be made to murder a child who carried its own twin, even had the child not yet held it, even from across a whole country, even asleep in a cot. I think the phoenix in the wand knew its brother was in the world and meant to grow up to hold it, and I think in the half-instant of that curse, the murdering heart hesitated one beat against the murder, because you cannot make one half of a heart destroy the other half. And in that half-instant the mother's shelter caught, and the curse turned and rebounded and struck the one who cast it, and unmade him, or nearly, and left on the child's forehead a mark." Harry's hand went, without his deciding it, to the thin scar at his hairline, the scar Aunt Petunia had wiped too hard for 4 years, the scar Dumbledore's eyes had gone to and away, the scar he had covered under his fringe his whole conscious life because his guardian had asked him to. "That mark," said Ollivander, and his voice was almost nothing now, "is where the brother wand's curse touched you and could not kill you. You have carried the print of the wand on your skin since you were 15 months old. And the frost, Harry, the frost you felt 3 years ago in this shop, the second phoenix note far away with something cold laid over it, something being made to be cold when it was not cold underneath. That was the wand. That is where it has lain these 11 years, wherever its master's ruin left it, cold and abandoned and grieving for its brother, which is you, which is the wand in that box, and which is, in the end, why I have never been able to sell your wand to anyone, and why it has waited, and why the whole shop woke the night you came. It knew its brother's twin had come home. They have been calling to each other across the dark your whole life, Harry, the wand that will be yours and the wand that made your scar, and now you know it, and now you understand what you have been hearing all along, and I am so sorry that a thing so beautiful has such a wound woven through the middle of it. but you are old enough to carry the whole of it now, and better you carry it whole than in pieces, and better you hear it from an old man who loves you than from a stranger on a train. Harry sat a long time, the holly wand hummed, the shop kept its hush. And then Harry did the thing that told Ollivander more than any word could have that the child had become in some deep place ready. He did not weep for himself or ask why or turn from the box. He reached out and laid his finger once more against the holly wand gently, and he said in a voice that shook but did not break, "Then the other one's not evil either. The U one, is it? It's just like the pear wand. It got made to do a terrible thing that wasn't in its nature, and it's been grieving ever since. It's my wand's brother, and it's out there cold in the dark being blamed for a murder it didn't want to do." And Ollivander put his face in his hands, and his shoulders shook, and when he looked up his silver eyes were streaming, and he did not pretend it was dust. "You are 11 years old," he said, "and you have just forgiven the wand that scarred you because you could hear that it did not want to. There has not been a soul like you in 1,000 years, Harry Potter, and I thank whatever wood is listening that you walked into my shop and not into anyone else's, because in anyone else's hands a heart like yours would have been a weapon, and here it has only ever been a gift, and it will go north with you in September and be a gift there too. And I will be the loneliest and proudest old man in England every single day that you're gone." Harry carried the knowledge of his own history quietly, the way he carried everything, and it changed small things in him without breaking anything. He touched the scar less now that he understood it, and when he did touch it his fingers went gentle, the way they went gentle on a grieving wand, because he had decided that the mark was not a wound the murderer had left in him, but a wound the murderer's wand had suffered too. A place where two brothers had refused for one half instant to destroy each other, and that was not a thing to flinch from. He thought about the U wand often, out in the cold dark of the world, grieving for its twin. He did not tell Ollivander how often, because he did not want to be told to stop. But the thing that changed him most in those late weeks of spring was not the murder, it was the parents. Because now that Harry knew the shape of it, he could not stop wanting the rest, and he asked, one evening at the bench, in the careful voice he used for the things that mattered most, whether Ollivander remembered his mother's and father's wands the way he remembered all the others. And Ollivander put down his work and looked at Harry a while, and then he said that he did, that he remembered them the way he remembered his own hands, and that he would give Harry the only thing he had left of James and Lily Potter, which was the memory of the mornings they had first come into this shop, and that Harry should listen, because it was as near as he would ever come to meeting them. "Your father came first," Ollivander said. "The summer of 1971, a fortnight before your mother, though of course they did not know each other yet, 2 11-year-olds a fortnight apart in my shop and neither the wiser. He was a menace, your father, I say it with love. He came through that door already certain he was going to be marvelous at everything, and he swept the wands off the counter with an experimental flourish before I had chosen a single one, and I had to speak to him rather sharply, and he grinned at me entirely unrepentant, and I knew at once he was going to be difficult and I was going to be fond of him, which is exactly what happened. Mahogany chose him on the 4th try, 11 inches pliable. A wand for transfiguration, for changing one thing cleverly into another, and there was a mischief in the grain of it that matched the mischief in young James so exactly that when it went off in his hand it did not spark Harry, it laughed. A little shower of gold that spun in the air like a Catherine wheel, and your father laughed with it, and the two of them were, from that first second, a matched pair of troublemakers, and I have rarely enjoyed a choosing more." Harry sat very still, holding the picture, an 11-year-old boy with his own untidy hair, grinning unrepentant, a wand laughing gold in his hand. "And your mother," Ollivander's voice changed, went softer, the way it had gone for the widower, a fortnight later. "And she was the opposite of him in every way that first morning, quiet where he was loud, watchful, a little uncertain, a Muggle-born girl who had only just learned that any of this was real, and had not yet let herself believe she was allowed to belong to it. She stood at that counter with her hands folded, and she did not touch anything without asking, and she asked good questions, careful questions, the questions of a person who wanted to understand a thing before she was trusted with it. Willow chose her 10 1/4 inches swishy, a wand for charm work, and willow, Harry, is a wood for those who have insecurity they have not yet grown out of and great untapped potential underneath it, and it chooses people who are going to become far more than they yet believe. When it woke in her hand she gasped, and then she smiled, and it was the smile of a person being told by the wood itself, you are allowed, you belong here, this is yours. And I have thought of that smile many times over the years. She grew into everything the willow saw in her. She was one of the most gifted witches to pass through the shop in my lifetime, your mother, and she was kind with it, which is rarer than the gift, and when she came back years later to have her own son measured for his first spectacles, she still asked careful questions, and still had that smile in her somewhere, and I did not know the last time she stood at my counter that it was the last time. One never does. Harry did not speak for a long while. He had come into the shop at 4 with no parents at all, only a cupboard and a coat that did not fit, and he had lived 7 years with the fact of them as a closed and silent thing, a grief with no faces in it. And now he had faces. A grinning boy and a careful girl, a fortnight apart, in this very room, on the far side of a counter he had oiled 1,000 times. He had met them at last, and he had met them here, through the only witnesses that remained, which were the memories the wand-maker kept the way other men keep photographs. "Thank you," Harry said when he could, "for remembering them so I could have them." And Ollivander, who had thought for 80 years that his perfect memory for wands was the loneliest of his gifts, a curse that made him unable to forget any of the thousands who had passed through and gone, discovered in that moment that it had all along been, without his knowing it, a way of keeping the dead alive for exactly this, for a boy who had no one else to remember his parents for him, and he had to get up and busy himself at the far end of the bench for a time before he could go on. They spoke in those weeks of Hogwarts too, because it was coming, and because Harry was both hungry for it and afraid of it in the way of a child who has only ever had one safe place and cannot quite believe another exists. He would be at the castle an ordinary first year, one of 40, and he would learn the ordinary magic, the wand-waving and the incantations, that he had watched customers' children by the tools for his whole life. And he was, Ollivander told him, going to be rather good at it, because a boy who understood wands the way Harry did would understand spells from the inside in a way his classmates never would. But he would also have to hide there the deepest thing about himself, more carefully even than in the shop, because a school was 400 children and 100 portraits and a ghost in every corridor, and secrets did not keep in such places, and a wand friend discovered at 11 alone, far from any old wand-maker who could stand between him and the world, would be a wand friend in danger. "You have kept it behind your teeth your whole life," Ollivander said, "and you have kept it well, and you will keep it there at school, and it will be lonelier there than it has ever been here, because here you had me to be wholly yourself with, and there you will have no one, not at first. That is the hardest thing I am asking of you, harder than any lesson, and I am sorry to ask it. But you will find, I think, a friend or two in time, the ordinary kind, and you will learn which of them has earned the answer, the way the professor told you, and one day, when you are grown and the world is safer, you may not have to hide it any longer. Until then you carry it the way I carried my grief, alone but not forever, and never in this room where you may always, always put it down." He gave Harry a thing to take north, though it was still weeks until the leaving. It was not grand. It was the little plane, his father's plane, the one from the tool set of Harry's 5th birthday, the one an Ollivander had given a small son 80 years before. "A wand-maker keeps his first tools," Ollivander said gruffly, "and you are a wand-maker now, whatever else the school makes of you, and you will take a maker's plane to that castle, and you will keep it on your windowsill, and it will remind you on the lonely nights that you have a bench to come home to and an old man keeping it warm. That is all. Put it in your bag now so you do not forget it in the flurry at the end. There, good." And through all of it, under the tenderness and the teaching and the meeting of the dead, the shadow held its place at the edge of everything, because Emeric Vane had not gone away. He had only gone quiet, which in a patient man is worse. Now and then Harry felt him at the mouth of the far alley in the blue dusk, grey and still, watching the shop, and the wands felt him too, and their singing those weeks had a listening quality to it, a wariness, like a household that has heard a prowler in the lane and sleeps with one ear open. Ollivander checked the locks each night. He kept the holly and dragon wand nearer to hand than Harry had ever seen it. And once finding Harry looking up at the high shelf where the holly wand waited in its box, he said quietly, "Not yet. Its hour is coming, and coming faster than I would like, but it is not here, and a wand taken up before its hour is a wand taken up afraid, and you will not take yours up afraid. When you take it, Harry, you will take it because it is time, and not because you are cornered. I mean to see to that. It is the last thing I mean to give you, and I mean to give it right." And Harry looked at the pale wand humming low and patient in its open box, his wand, his brother's brother, and believed him, and turned back to the bench, and the two of them worked on into the good lamplit dark while the shadow kept its distance and the wands kept their watch, and the summer came on toward the hour that neither planning nor love could hold off much longer. They made Harry's wand that June. Not the holly wand, that was made already and waiting and would be taken up in its proper hour and not before. This was the apprentice piece, the wand a maker makes with his own hands to prove he is a maker, and Ollivander walked Harry through every step of it but did not once touch the wood, because the whole point of it was that Harry's hands, and only Harry's, must marry this pair. They did not go to a forest, there was no time, and Ollivander said the apprentice piece was traditionally made from the master's own seasoned stores, so that the maker's whole attention could go on the marriage and not the courtship. He let Harry choose the wood, and Harry went down into the deep cellar alone by candle and walked the racks with his hand out, not looking, only listening, the way he had learned, and he passed the holly and the oak and the vine and the yew, which he did not touch, and at the very end of the last rack a length of wood leaned toward his hand of its own accord and hummed low and warm and steady, and Harry brought it up into the light, and it was Rowan. "Rowan," said Ollivander, and smiled. "The Defender's wood. The Guardian, a wood that has never in all the histories been found in the hand of a wizard who turned to the dark, because it will not go, it protects. It is the wood you would want at your back and never at your throat. Of course it leaned to you. It has known you 11 years. What core? And Harry chose the core the same way, listening, and he did not choose the dragon that strained at him or the unicorn that ached, but reached past both for the one that turned to consider him, the phoenix, because the Holly Wand's brotherhood had taught him that spring that he was a phoenix-hearted boy whether he willed it or not, and Ollivander watched him choose it and said nothing, only nodded, as though a thing long expected had come. And Harry married them over 3 weeks with his own hands, the rowan and the phoenix feather, and it was the hardest and the best work of his young life, and there were failures, a first seeding that would not sing, a binding that had to be undone and done again, and Ollivander let him fail and mend the failure, because a maker who has never failed does not know how to save a wand that is going wrong. And on the last morning of June, Harry lifted off the bench a wand of rowan and phoenix, 11 inches, made whole by his own hands, and felt it settle into oneness under his fingers, wood and heart no longer two things but one, and it was not his wand, it would choose some other child one day, but he had made it. He had gotten the love into the wood, and Ollivander looked at it and looked at Harry, who had made it, and said only gruffly, "Well, you are a wand maker," and turned away to hide his face, and put the rowan wand in a box, and set it on the shelf to wait for the hand it would belong to, the first Ollivander wand in 300 years made by a hand that was not born to the name. Harry was still holding the memory of that morning 3 days later, when Emeric Vane came back, and this time he did not knock, and this time the courtesies were gone. He came at closing in the long gold light of a July evening, and the bell did not ring because he had done something to it, some quiet cruelty worked on the old brass, so that it hung silent as he opened the door, and the first Harry and Ollivander knew of him was the wands going not quiet but rigid, every one of them locking still on the shelves in a way they had never done, a fear so total it had no sound. Ollivander came out of the workshop fast with Harry behind him, and Vane was standing in the middle of the shop in his grey coat with his gloved hand and his bare hand and his pale patient eyes, and he was smiling very slightly, the smile of a man who has finished a long calculation and found the answer he expected. "I have been unfair to you, Mr. Ollivander," Vane said in his quiet, counted voice. "I have treated you these 2 years as a keeper of books and offered you a student's price for them and been refused and thought myself thwarted. It was only recently that I understood I had been looking at the wrong treasure the whole time. The books were never the tree. You told me so yourself in this room. The tree, you said, is a way of listening, learned by a person the wood consents to teach. And I went away and I turned that over and I thought, what if such a person already existed? Not learned over 40 years, born, a person the wood consents to teach because the wood has always consented from the cradle. A wand friend, you said they had died out. You said it a little too quickly, Mr. Ollivander, and your shop boy went a little too carefully blank, and I have spent 2 years and a good deal of money confirming what I suspected in the first 5 minutes. His pale eyes moved slowly to Harry and stayed. "Imagine my astonishment," Vane went on softly, "when I set out to learn who your foundling ward truly was, this quiet cousin's orphan with no name, and found that he had no history at all before the autumn of 1984. No birth recorded, no parents named. A boy who simply appears at 4 years old in the care of the one wand maker in Britain who might recognize what he was. And I thought, there is only one 4-year-old who vanished out of the world in the autumn of 1984. Only one child the whole of Wizarding Britain believes to be hidden safe with Muggle relations. And I looked at your shop boy's forehead, Mr. Ollivander, under that carefully grown fringe, and I wondered what mark I might find there if I brushed the hair aside." He tilted his head. "You have hidden in this shop for 7 years the 2 things I have wanted my whole life more than breath, the secret of why the Dark Lord's wand failed against the Potter child. Living wand friend who could find it for me, and they are the same person. They have been the same person all along. Hello, Harry Potter. I have looked for you for a very long time." Ollivander had moved without seeming to, so that he stood between Vane and Harry, the holly and dragon wand come into his hand from nowhere, and his voice when he spoke was not the wandmaker's hush and not the shopkeeper's courtesy, but something Harry had never heard from him, cold and level and absolutely without fear. "You will leave my shop, Emeric Vane," Ollivander said, "and you will not come back, and you will not touch that child, not tonight, not ever, because if you take one step toward him I will not duel you. I am too old to duel you. I will do the other thing, the thing you have never once considered because you do not believe it is real. I will call every wand in this shop by name, and I will set 5,000 of them on you at once, and they will not herd you out the coal hole like your hirelings. They will remember your pear wand, which I made, which you tortured, and they will take it apart in your hand, and you with it. Do you believe me? Look at them. Look at the shelves. Do you believe me?" And Vane looked at the shelves, at 5,000 wands locked rigid in the gold evening light, and for one moment the smile flickered because some animal part of him did believe, did feel the shop's hate pressing on his skin. But then he looked back at Ollivander, and the smile returned colder because he had seen the one thing the bluff could not hide. "You are 94 years old," Vane said gently, "and calling 5,000 wands at once would stop your heart in your chest before the third of them left its shelf, and we both know it, and so does the child. I see it in his face. No, I will not touch him tonight. I have waited 7 years. I can wait a little longer and do it properly when the wand-maker who loves him is not standing in the way. I only came this evening to let you know that the waiting is over and the certainty has begun. I know who he is, I know what he is, and I will have both the secret and the wand friend, Mr. Ollivander, one way or a worse way before the summer is out. He inclined his gray head and turned, and at the door he paused and did not look back. Enjoy your last weeks with him, he said. They are your last. And he was gone into the gold evening, and the bell did not ring because he had silenced it, and the wands did not sing because they were still rigid with fear, and Harry stood in the ringing silence of the shop that had been the only safe place he had ever known, and understood that it was not safe any longer, and that it was, in some measure, his fault, and that the one he loved most in the world had just been threatened with death for the crime of keeping him. Ollivander lowered the holly wand. His hand, Harry saw, was shaking now that it was over, the cold fearlessness spent, an old man's hand again. He turned and looked at Harry, and there was no hiding in his face, none at all, only the truth of how frightened he was and how much he loved him and how little time was left. We send for the professor, Ollivander said. Tonight, now. I swore I would before anyone on the day it became known, and it is known. Get me quill and parchment, Harry, and then you will pack a bag, because I do not think we can stay in this shop, and I will not gamble your life on my old heart holding out long enough to call the wands. He gripped Harry's shoulder hard. We are not beaten, hear me. He thinks he has weeks. He does not know what you can do. He thinks you a treasure to be stolen, not a weapon that can answer back. He has never once imagined that the wand friend might turn his own wand against him, because in his whole long study of the leaves he never found that page, and I hid the book that holds it before his hirelings ever reached the cellar. He does not know. That is the one card we hold, and it is a strong one, and we are going to play it, you and I, at a time and place of our choosing and not his. But first, tonight, we send for Dumbledore, and we get you out of the front line, and we think, because thinking is the thing that beats a patient man, and I have been thinking about Emeric Vane for 2 years, and I am not finished yet. And Harry got the quill and the parchment, and his hands were steady, steadier than his guardian's, because somewhere in the last 7 years, the frightened animal from the cupboard had become a boy who could stand in a ringing silence and think, and he set the parchment on the counter, and while Ollivander wrote to Dumbledore in a hand that shook, Harry looked up at the high left-hand shelf where the holly wand waited in its open box, humming low and steady, his wand, his brother's brother. The other half of his sentence, and he understood that its proper hour was coming faster than anyone had planned, and that when it came he would be ready, because a wand-maker had married him to the whole of the art with love, and love, Ollivander had taught him, was how the strength got into the wood. Chapter 5 and Chapter 6. The man who collected endings. They sent for Dumbledore that same night, and the sending was the last ordinary thing they did together, though neither of them knew it. Ollivander wrote the letter at the counter in a hand that steadied as it went, because writing to the professor was itself a kind of defense, a door opening onto help, and he set out in it plainly all of it. That Emeric Vane had learned who Harry was, that Vane had learned what Harry was, that Vane had promised to take both the secret and the child before the summer's end, and had silenced the shop bell to prove he could reach in past the wards whenever he chose. He read it over twice and added a line at the foot in smaller writing, which Harry did not see him write and would find later, folded in a drawer, and which said only, "If it should go wrong before you come, the child is worth everything and I am worth nothing. Spend me and save him. That is my last instruction and my dearest wish." Then he sealed it and gave it to his own owl, a patient tawny creature named Aldous who had carried the shop's post for 20 years, and he stood at the dark window and watched the bird lift away over the chimney pots toward the north, and he said to the window as much to himself as to Harry, "It will reach him by morning. He will come or he will send those he trusts, and either way there will be help in this shop before noon. We have only to keep the night." They tried to keep the night. They did not undress. Ollivander banked the stove and put out the lamps and sat in the dark of the workshop with the holly and dragon wand across his knees, and Harry sat in the chair opposite with a blanket he did not use, and the two of them kept the watch together as they had kept it before, and the drugged hours crept by and nothing came, and the not coming was worse than any coming, because a boy can brace himself against a blow he can see. Harry listened to the shop all night, 5,000 wands murmuring their uneasy lullaby, and he told himself that they would wake him, that they had woken him before, that nothing could come into the shop past 5,000 hearts that loved him without the shop crying out. He was 11 years old and he believed it because it had always been true, and because Ollivander believed it, and because a child asleep in a shop full of things that love him has to believe it, or he cannot sleep at all. He did not know, and Ollivander did not know, that Emeric Vane had spent 2 years learning exactly how the wands woke, and exactly what did not wake them. That was the thing Harry would turn over and over afterward in the long nights, the cruelty of the timing, because Vane had not been guessing about the letter. Vane had been waiting for it. A man who sends for help stops watching the door and starts watching the road. He sets his hope on the north and lets his guard soften toward the near dark. and Emeric Vane had spent his whole patient life in the narrow space between the sending and the coming, and he came into that space now the way water comes into a low field without hurry, filling it from the bottom so that you do not see it rising until it is already at your knees. He did not use the coal hole this time, and he did not force the door, because forcing the door would have woken the wands. What he had brought in a lead casket that Harry would learn of only afterward was a thing out of the deepest and most forbidden corner of the collector's art, and Harry felt it before he understood it. He felt near 3 in the morning the shop begin to go quiet, not the ordinary settling, a wrongness, a smothering. One by one, and then in rows, and then in whole galleries at once, the 5,000 voices Harry had listened to every night of his life went muffled, went gray, went down under something thick and cold, the way bees go down under a killing frost, not dying but stilled, slowed, sent under into a heavy gray stupor from which nothing could rouse them. It was smoke. Gray smoke rendered from the ash of burned wands, wands broken and burned in cruelty, breath through the keyhole into the sleeping shop, and it did to the living wands what such a cold does to a hive, and it laid the whole singing heart of Ollivanders flat and silent while the danger crept in among the shelves, and none of them woke to cry the alarm. But Harry woke. Not because the wands woke him, they could not, they were going down themselves. But because a wand friend and the wands are one instrument, strung on the same frame, and when the shop went down into that drugged gray sleep, Harry felt the strings of himself go slack all at once, felt 5,000 voices that were half his own soul pressed flat under a smothering weight, and he came up out of sleep gasping, clawing at a blanket, not knowing what was wrong, only that the singing had stopped, that the singing that had rocked him every night for 7 years had been pressed out like a candle. And he was on his feet and through the curtain before he was properly awake, and the workshop was full of gray smoke, and Emeric Vane was standing in it. He had Ollivander already. That was the first thing Harry saw, and the worst, his guardian down on his knees on the workshop floor with Vane's gloved hand fisted in his white hair, the old head dragged back, and the pear wand, the screaming stolen pear wand, laid along the side of the exposed throat. Ollivander's eyes found Harry across the smoke and went wide, and he called out in a voice Harry had never heard from him, high and cracked, not with fear for himself, but with a father's terror. "Run, Harry, the cellar bell, run." "He will not run," said Emeric Vane. He did not raise his voice. In all the time Harry knew him, he never once raised his voice. He stood in the gray smoke with the stolen wand at his prisoner's throat and looked at Harry across the drugged and silent shop, and his pale eyes were calm and certain and almost gentle, the eyes of a man who has planned a thing so completely that its unfolding gives him no thrill at all, only the quiet satisfaction of a long sum coming out even. "He will not run," Vane said again, "because he is not the child you keep insisting he is, Mr. Ollivander. He is the reason your wands love this shop. And a boy the wands love does not run and leave 5,000 of them, and the one soul who has ever been kind to him, in a room alone with me. Do you, Harry Potter?" The gloved hand tightened in the white hair, the old head bent further back, the pear wand pressed closer, and it screamed silently in Harry's smothered ears. A warm and gentle wood forced once again to threaten a life it had no wish to take. "You come here slowly, hands open where I can see them, and you do exactly as I tell you, or I will kill the only father you have ever had on the floor of the shop he raised you in, and I will make you watch me do it, and then I will take you anyway, because you will have nowhere left in all the world to run to. That is the arithmetic of the room. He taught you arithmetic, I am sure. Check my working. Tell me if I have it wrong." Harry stood in the drugged gray shop and did the thing his whole life had trained him to do, the thing that had kept him alive in the cupboard and kept his gift hidden in the shop. He read the room, fast and cold, past his own hammering fear, looking for the move under the move. And what he read told him 3 things in the space of 2 breaths, and he held all 3 of them still behind his plain blank face while his pulse went and went in his ears. The first thing was that Vane meant every word of it about Ollivander, entirely, without bluff. The wand at the throat was not a threat, it was a promise being kept in advance. The second thing was that Vane did not know what Harry could truly do. He had come to steal a wand friend, a treasure, a living key that could be made to unlock the one secret he had failed for 60 years to reach. He had not come to fight a wand friend, because in all his patient study of the scattered leaves of the art he had never once found the page Ollivander had hidden, the page about the true name, and so it had never entered his careful arithmetic that the small boy in the doorway might be able to reach out, right now, through the wood itself and take the stolen wand out of his hand. He thought Harry a key. He did not know Harry was also a lock that could turn on him. And the third thing, the thing that decided everything, the thing that closed Harry's hand where it had begun without his willing it to lift, he could not do it. Not here, not now. Because the pear wand was laid against Ollivander's throat, and the true name calling was not a duelist's flick, not a fast, bright thing. It was a listening and a reaching and a speaking, and it took time, whole seconds, and in the whole seconds it took to wake that wand and call it home it would first, for one startled half-instant, be a wand woken at a throat, and a wand woken at a throat might, in its first confusion, do the very thing it was being held to do before it understood who was calling it. He could not gamble the neck he loved on a half-instant, he would not, so Harry did not reach for the wand. He took the reaching, hot and ready in the front of his mind, and he put it away deep behind his teeth into the back place where the wood sense lived and no one could see it, and he let his face become a frightened child's face, which cost him nothing because a large part of him was exactly that, and he came forward slowly into the gray smoke with his hands open at his sides, and he made his voice small and made it shake, which also cost him nothing. "Don't hurt him," he said. "Please, I'll come. I'll do the secret, I'll find whatever you want, I promise, just don't hurt him, please." "There," said Vane softly, and something in him eased, the ease of a workman whose tool has answered to his hand exactly as designed. "You see, Mr. Ollivander, not a weapon, a child. You have spent 7 years teaching this boy to be brave, and he is at the very last precisely as brave as a cornered child who loves you, which is to say he will do anything I ask to keep you breathing 1 more hour. It is the most reliable leash ever devised, love. I have used it a great many times on far harder men than a wandmaker's foundling, and it has never once failed me." He looked at Harry almost with approval. "You will both come with me now, quietly, through the front. And if either of you cries out or reaches for a wand or so much as breaks his stride on the stair, the other dies where he stands, and I keep the one who is left, and the one who is left is worth more to me alive than the other is dead, so do not waste your night wondering which of you I would choose to lose. Up, old man, we are going to my house, where the air is clear, and there are a great many wands who will not interrupt us. And there, Harry Potter, over as many days as it takes, you are going to find me the thing I have wanted since before your parents were born, and your father here is going to sit in a chair and remind you, every hour, with the simple fact of his breathing, exactly why you will not stop looking until you have found it." Harry looked at Ollivander on his knees in the smoke, and Ollivander looked back at him, and in the look the old wandmaker tried with the whole of his soul to give an order, tried to say, "Run, boy, leave me, pull the bell and go," the thing he had made Harry swear to 100 times in the tense winter weeks. And Harry, meeting the streaming silver eyes across the gray smoke, answered him without a word, in the language the two of them had spoken to each other for 7 years, the language that lived under words. "No, not this time. I am not leaving you, trust me. I have a thing you do not know I have, and I will use it, but not here and not at your throat. Trust me, the way you have taught me to trust the wood." And Harry watched the understanding come up into the old eyes, and watched the terror in them change, become a different terror, a fear for Harry now rather than a fear of Vane, and then, under even that, impossibly, something that was almost, God help them both, hope. They went out through the front of the shop into the dead middle of the night, the collector and his 2 prisoners walking close together like 3 friends going home from a late supper, and behind them the shop lay drugged and silent, 5,000 wands asleep under gray ash, unable to wake, unable to lift so much as a splinter to help the child they loved. And the last thing Harry saw of the only home he had ever known, turning his head once on the threshold, was the high left-hand shelf where the holly wand lay in its open box, his wand, his brother's brother, the other half of his sentence, and even it was still, dragged down under the smoke into the same gray sleep as all the rest, and it did not wake, and it did not come to him. And Harry made himself turn his face away and go out the door and let it lie there sleeping. Because a wand taken up before its hour is a wand taken up afraid, and its hour was not this hour, and he would not, even now, even cornered, spend it wrong. Vane took them by a road Harry did not know. He led them up the black length of the alley and through a crack between 2 shuttered buildings into Knockturn Alley, which Harry had been forbidden all his life and had never once had cause to disobey, and down its crooked slope past shop fronts that watched them go with shuttered eyes, and then to a place in a wall that looked like nothing, a patch of soot-black brick no different from any other, until Vane laid his gloved hand flat against it and it folded. The way the wall behind the leaky cauldron had folded on the first night of Harry's whole new life, only this folding opened not onto light but onto a stair going down into the dark, worn hollow in the middle of each tread by a very long procession of feet. They went down it a long way. Air grew cold and still and smelled of stone and dust, and under those, faint and terrible, the particular smell Harry knew better than any child alive, the smell of wood and of the oils that dress it, so that he understood going down before he saw anything that they were descending into a place that had once been what his whole life had been, a place where wands were made and his skin crawled because a wandwork should be the warmest place in the world, and this one, he could already feel, was the coldest. They came out through a second fold at the bottom, and Harry stopped on the threshold of it, and even in his fear, even with his guardian's life clamped in a stranger's fist, he could not keep back the sound that came out of him, because it was the most terrible thing he had ever felt in his life. It was a wandworks old and vast and dead. Over the inner arch, in letters of tarnished brass gone almost black, ran a name Harry knew the way he knew all the great old names of his craft, B.L.Y. and Sons, W.N.D. McKRS, and beneath it a date 2 centuries gone. Bly and Sons, a great English house, rivals once to the Ollivanders, fallen and vanished before Garrick Ollivander was born, gone so wholly out of the world that Harry had thought them only a name in an old ledger. And here was where they had fallen, and here was where they had lain ever since. A long high hall of stone hollowed out under Nocturne Alley, galleries running up its walls into a darkness that swallowed the top of them, gallery above gallery above gallery, and every gallery lined, floor to unseen ceiling, with wands, thousands of them, tens of thousands. More wands than even Ollivander's whole shop held, ranked behind glass and iron up every wall of that enormous dead hall, and Harry stood on the threshold and reached out with his ear the way he could not help doing, the way he breathed, and what came back to him made him understand at last and all at once the whole of Americ Vane, and it was worse than anything Ollivander had ever told him, worse than anything he had imagined a person could be. They were silent. Every wand in that vast hall was silent, and it was not the drugged gray silence of the shop they had left, and it was not the deep content silence of a well-loved wand keeping its own counsel out of fullness. They were silent the way the dead are silent. Every single one of them had been ended, stopped at the true name in the deepest and most secret place, their allegiance severed, and their long marriage of wood and heart torn apart and the two halves pinned, each behind its own pane of glass, each with its own small brass label, like moths in a collector's case. Most of them looked whole. That was the horror of it. Not one in 100 was so much as cracked. They lay in their cases straight and polished and perfect, and every one of them was a corpse, its voice put out, its heart stopped, mounted and labeled and kept. Americ Vane had spent his whole long life collecting wands, and he had not collected them to use or to sell, or even to hoard in the ordinary miser's way. He had collected their endings. He had taken wand after wand after wand over 60 years out of every corner of the earth, and he had ended each one, silenced its voice, unmade its marriage, and pinned the silence in a case with a label. And this dead cathedral of stopped hearts was the whole sum and monument of his life, and he walked into it now with his own stolen, screaming pear wand and his two living prisoners, as though he were walking into his own drawing room, because he was. "You feel them," Vane said, watching Harry's face, and for the first time there was something in his level voice that was not calm, a low warmth under it, the warmth of a man showing a guest at long last the one thing he loves. "Of course you feel them. You are the only living soul who ever could. Do you know, in 60 years you are the first visitor I have ever wished to bring down here, because you are the first who could understand what he was looking at. The few who know I exist call me a collector, and they imagine I collect wands, and they are fools, all of them. Any rich fool collects wands. I collect the moment a wand ends, the single instant when the voice stops and the marriage breaks and the thing that was alive is very suddenly not. I have made that moment happen 30,000 times, Harry Potter, 30,000 endings by my own hand, and I have never once been able to hear it. Not truly, not the way you hear it, because I am deaf. I have always been deaf. I have spent my entire life building a cathedral of music with my own hands, stone by stone and voice by silenced voice, and I have never in all my years heard a single note of what I built." He walked forward into the hall, drawing his prisoners after him, and the pale eyes burned in the cold light with something that in another man Harry would have called grief. "When I was young," Vane said, "younger than you would believe, I too had a wand that loved me. Cedar and dragon, and it chose me at 11 in a shop very like the one I took you from tonight. And for a time I was ordinary and happy and heard nothing, because a man who has what he loves does not listen for it. And then I went to the war, the first one, on the losing side, and my hand was ruined and my wand with it, snapped in a curse meant to kill me, and I lived, and I have never since held a wand that was mine. This one." He lifted his gloved right hand a little, the ruined hand, and then let it fall, and touched instead the pear wand in his left. "This one I took off a dead man on a battlefield because I had to have something, and it has hated me for 40 years. And I have felt it hating me every hour of every day, felt it coming looser in my hand year by year, and I have lived that whole time in the certain knowledge that one day it will slip its leash entirely, and I will die by the very thing I hold, alone, betrayed, deaf, with 30,000 silences on my walls, and not one voice that is mine. That, Harry Potter, is what I have wanted my whole life, not power, not glory. I want a wand that cannot leave me. I want one voice in all the world that is mine and cannot be taken, cannot come loose, cannot turn, so that I can set down at last, before I die, the fear I have carried since I was a young man with a ruined hand on a lost battlefield, and you are going to find it for me. You are going to stand in this hall and hear for me the thing I have been deaf to my whole life, and you are going to find me the one wand among all the wands of the world whose voice never ends, and I am going to take it up, and I am never, ever going to be afraid again." For one moment, one only, standing in that cold necropolis with his guardian's life in the balance, Harry felt something he had not expected to feel for Americ Vane, and it was not forgiveness, and it was not pity exactly, but it was near enough to pity to frighten him, because he understood Vane now completely, the way he understood a grieving wand, and what he understood was that Americ Vane was, under all the cold and all the murder, Only another creature in terror of losing the thing it loved, and that everything he had done, every silenced voice on every wall, had been done by a frightened person trying in the most monstrous way imaginable to stop being afraid. And Harry put that understanding, too, behind his teeth and kept it because it was true, and because he thought, though he did not yet know how, that it might matter at the end more than anything. Then Vane forced Ollivander down into a great iron chair at the very center of the hall and bound him there, wrist and chest and ankle, with cords that Harry felt sickened, were themselves made of wandwood, murdered wands drawn out into wire, so that his guardian sat pinned in the middle of the collection like one more specimen not yet mounted, one more voice not yet stopped. And Vane stood the stolen pear wand upright in an iron clamp beside the chair, its tip toward Ollivander's heart, and set it, with 3 precise passes of his bare left hand, to a working of his own devising. A precaution, he said, against several arithmetics. This wand is now bound to my own living heartbeat, and to these cords, and to the floor within 3 paces of this chair. If my heart should stop, it looses the killing curse into his, so do not imagine that killing me saves him. It does the opposite. If the cords are cut, it looses. If you come within 3 paces of him, it looses. And if the professor you sent your little owl to should arrive in time with a company of oarers and a great deal of noise, which he may yet do, I have made certain further arrangements, and it looses. There is no arithmetic, Harry, in which you save this old man by force, or by cleverness, or by rescue. There is only the arithmetic in which you find me my wand, and I, being a man of my word, and having no further need of hostages once I hold a wand that cannot be taken from me, let you both walk out of here alive. Now. He stepped back and spread his ruined hand, and his whole one at the 30,000 silent endings ranked up the black walls into the dark. Begin, listen. Somewhere in my collection, or somewhere in the wide world I have not yet reached, there is a voice that does not stop. Find it for me. You have until I lose my patience. I have been patient 60 years, but not, I find, tonight. Tonight, at the very last, I am in something of a hurry. And Harry stood in the dead hall in the Cathedral of Stopped Hearts, with his guardian bound to an iron chair under a cursed trigger, and 30,000 murdered wands ranked silent up the walls above him into the dark. And he understood that the hour had come, the hour Ollivander had wanted so badly to give him right, to give him unhurried and unafraid, and that it was not going to be given to him at all. It was going to have to be taken, alone, cornered, in the worst place in all the world. And that he, 11 years old, was going to have to make his whole strange art be enough, or watch the one he loved die in a chair for the crime of having loved him first. So Harry began, or seemed to. He walked out into the hall in the pose of obeying slowly, his head tipped a little, his face open and listening, a boy doing as he was told. And Emeric Vane watched him go with a hunger that was almost unbearable to feel, the hunger of a deaf man watching someone else's eyes at a window he can never reach, and did not follow because he had bound the one thing that mattered to the chair and knew the child would not go far from it. Harry walked the first gallery, and he did listen because he could not help it, and what he heard as he passed the ranked cases nearly broke him. He had thought from the threshold that the wands were simply silent. They were not simply anything. Each one, as he came level with it, gave up to him the last of itself, the thin cold afterprint that even an ended wand keeps, the way a room keeps the shape of a chair after the chair is gone, and Harry read them as he passed, one after another, and every one had been someone's. Here was a little wand of cypress, 7 inches, a child's wand, ended before its child ever grew into it. Here was a healer's wand, hazel and unicorn, that had spent 90 years mending and had been stopped in the middle of a kindness. Here was a wand that had loved its wizard so entirely that even now, dead behind glass, the shape of that love hung about it like cold perfume, and it had been ended anyway, unmade, labeled, pinned, for no reason at all except that a deaf man had wanted to make the moment of its silence happen and had been unable, even so, to hear it. 30,000 of them. 30,000 endings, and Harry walked among them with his eyes stinging and his face kept carefully open and listening, and he understood that he was walking through the largest grief he had ever stood inside, and that the one who had made it could not hear a note of it, and that this, precisely this, was the whole horror and the whole pity of Emeric Vane, that he had spent his life among the most terrible music in the world and had built every bar of it himself and had never once been let inside it. And while Harry walked and read and grieved, the other part of his mind, the cold part, the part Ollivander had spent 7 years teaching to reason mid-scene while the rest of him felt, laid the problem out and turned it over and looked for the seam. Force was gone, Vane had closed that door with great care, and Harry made himself walk all the way around the closing of it to be sure. If he came within 3 paces of the chair, the pear wand loosed the killing curse into Ollivander's heart. If he cut the wandwood cords, it loosed. If he stopped Vane's heart, which he could not do in any case, it loosed. The curse was married to the beat of it, so that killing the collector killed the captive in the same instant. And if Dumbledore came crashing in with oars, Vane had said, arrangements had been made, and it loosed. Every path that ran through force or rescue or speed ran straight into Ollivander's death, and Harry walked the whole ring of it twice and found no gap, because there was no gap. Vane was patient, and Vane was thorough, and Vane had built a box with no door in it. But Vane had built the box out of one wand, and the wand was the pear wand, and the pear wand was loose. That was the seam, and Harry found it walking the second gallery with his face turned up to the dead in the pose of searching them. Every thread in the room, every lock on the box, ran through the pear wand. It was the wand at the throat, and the wand at the heart, and the wand married to the heartbeat, and the wand that would loose at 3 paces, or a cut cord, or a crashing rescue. Vane had made his whole fortress out of a single soldier, and the single soldier hated him, and had hated him for 40 years, and was, Harry could feel it plainly now across the whole width of the hall, looser tonight than it had ever been, worn to the last thread of its bondage by being made, one more time, to threaten a life it did not wish to end. Vane had never once considered that the wand itself might be turned, because in 60 years of collecting endings he had never met the one kind of person who could turn it, and he did not know even now, even with that person walking his galleries, that he had brought the seam of his whole design into the room in the shape of a boy. And here the cold part of Harry's mind did the last and hardest turn, the turn that made the plan, and it was not the turn Vane would have feared even had he known to fear it. Because the obvious move, the duelist's move, was to call the pear wand out of the clamp and make it strike its master down, and that move was death, because Vane's stopped heart was Ollivander's stopped heart, the two of them wound to the same trigger. Harry could not make the pear wand kill Vane. He did not want to, but more than that, he could not, because it would be the same as loosing the curse himself, so the plan could not be to turn the wand into a weapon. The plan had to be subtler than a weapon, and it had to be exactly the thing the wand already, in its deepest starved and grieving temper, wanted to do. He did not need the pear wand to attack, he needed it to refuse. He needed to learn its true name, whole and true, and to speak it back to it at the one right moment, so gently that the deaf man beside it never felt the calling begin, and to remind the pear wand of what it was, a warm wood, a healer's wood, a wood that in all its long history had never willingly ended a life. And then when the moment came and Vane in his fear or his fury reached to make it kill, the wand, called home to a hand that loved it, would simply decline. It would not fire. A wand that has come back to itself will not murder for a hand it hates, no matter what trigger is wound to it, because the trigger commands the wood, and the wood, once it remembers it is free, no longer answers the command. That was the whole of the plan, and it was not a spell, and it was not a duel, and it was not rescue. It was a wandmaker's son reminding a good and broken thing of its own true nature, and trusting it at the last to be what it was. It would take time. That was the danger. The learning of a true name whole enough to speak was not quick, and he would have to do it while walking galleries and pretending to search, hiding the reaching behind his obedient searching face, drawing the pear wand's true name up to him, one strand at a time, so slowly that neither Vane's deaf attention nor the wand's own startled first alarm would ever catch the calling as it came. He would need every minute Vane's patience would give him, and perhaps more than that. And so, as he passed the foot of the great iron chair on his slow circuit of the second gallery, keeping his careful 3 paces and more, Harry did the one thing he could do to buy the rest of the time, which was to speak, without a word, to the bound man in the chair. He did not look at Ollivander directly. A look would have been read. He let his eyes trail across the chair the way they trailed across everything, searching, and he opened, behind them, the language under words that the two of them had spoken for 7 years, and he told his guardian in that language everything at once, the way you can only tell a person you have loved a long time. I know what he has done to the wand. I know it is loose. I am learning its name. Do not be afraid for me. Keep him talking. Keep his patience. Give me the minutes, and I will give you the rest of your life. And he felt, without looking, the answer come back across the cords in the 3 paces in the whole cold hall, felt the old wandmaker understand, all at once, exactly what his impossible child was doing, the thing out of the palest and oldest book, the thing he had taught him in the cellar and prayed he would never need, being done now, here, alone, cornered in the worst place in the world. And Harry felt the terror in his guardian turn, one last time, into the other thing, the thing that was almost too large to bear, and he had to look away, up into the ranked and silent dead, so that his own face would not give it away. Then Harry settled to it. He let his walking slow to the pace of a boy genuinely lost among wonders, and he let his listening open wide, and under the cover of the whole vast grief of the hall, under 30,000 silences, he reached out very quietly toward the one voice that was not silent, and began, strand by patient strand, to gather up its name. He did the one thing he could do before he began. In the half-second when Vane had turned to set the cursed trigger, when the pale attention had gone off him and onto the working of the clamp, Harry had reached, not for any wand in the hall, but back north and behind him, 300 miles across the sleeping country, back to the drugged shop and down its cellar stairs to the old bell working that hung there, the working older than the telephone that rang in a certain office in a certain castle, and he had struck it once. With his ear and his mind and everything Ollivander had ever taught him, a single clear note flung out of a cellar in London into a room in the north where an old headmaster kept a phoenix and slept lightly. He did not know whether it had carried. He did not know whether anyone had heard, or would understand, or would come in time. But he had rung it, and it was the last thing he could do that was not the art itself, and now he had come to the art itself, and there was nothing left between him and it. So Harry turned to face the ranked and silent dead, and he let his shoulders drop, and he let his breath go slow, and he began, exactly as if he were obeying, to listen. And he listened past the 30,000 corpses on the walls, which had nothing left to tell him, and he listened past his own fear, which had a great deal to tell him, and none of it useful. And he reached out quietly behind his plain and frightened and obedient face, toward the one wand in all that hall that was not dead, the one wand that still had a voice, the stolen pear wand screaming its 40-year scream in the iron clamp beside his guardian's heart, and he began, very gently, so gently that the deaf man beside it would never feel it beginning, to learn its true name. Chapter 6 and Chapter 7. The wand's true name. The hours in the dead hall were the strangest of Harry's life, and the most patient and the most afraid. He walked the galleries of Bly and Sons through what must have been the last of the night and into a morning that never came, because there was no sky down there. Only the cold blue witchlight vein kept burning, and the ranked and silent dead going up the walls into the dark, and he searched them, or seemed to, and all the while, under the searching, one strand at a time, he gathered the true name of the pear wand out of the air. It was the hardest thing he had ever done, and not for the reason he had expected. He had thought the difficulty would be in the hearing. It was not. He could hear the pear wand plainly, screaming its 40-year scream from the iron clamp beside Ollivander's heart, and its true name, once he began to draw it up, came to him more readily than any name he had ever reached for, because a wand so starved and so grieving and so long unheard was desperate to be heard, and it gave itself up to him strand by strand almost gratefully, the wood note and the dragon note and the long red-black history of 40 years in a cruel hand. All winding up toward him out of the dark. The difficulty was in the slowness. He could not take the name in a rush. A rush would have woken the wand fully, and a wand woken fully at a heart is a wand that might fire, and a rush would have changed his face, and Vane was watching his face. So Harry gathered the name the way you fill a cup from a slow spring, one bead of water at a time, hiding the filling behind a boy's blank searching eyes, and it took hours, and every hour Emeric Vane grew colder and stiller and less patient, and every hour the trap of it all tightened one more turn. Twice Vane made him come close to the dead and name what he heard to prove he was working, and twice Harry did truthfully, describing the ended wands in the cases, the Cypress Child's wand, the healer's hazel, and Vane listened with that terrible starved hunger and said each time, "Yes, yes, but not the one I want, keep looking," and Harry kept looking. Once Ollivander spoke from the chair in a dry steady voice of nothing in particular, of the history of the House of Bly and how it had fallen, keeping Vane's attention turned toward talk and away from the child walking the galleries, buying Harry minutes with words the way a man pays out rope, and Harry understood what his guardian was doing and loved him so much in that moment that he nearly lost the strand of the name he was drawing, and had to stop and breathe and begin again. And through it all, faint and far and growing, Harry felt something else at the very edge of his hearing, north and behind him, that he did not dare turn his attention toward for fear of losing the name. A single wand waking, not the pear wand, his own. The holly wand, 300 miles away in a drugged and silent shop, was beginning very slowly to stir under the gray ash, because the gray ash was failing, its cruelty spent, and because somewhere in the dark a wand friend it had waited 11 years for was reaching, whether he meant to or not, toward the deepest work of his art, and the holly wand felt it and woke and began, faint and patient, to sing toward him across the whole sleeping country. Its note threading down into the dead hall under everything else, so that Harry, gathering a stranger's name in a cathedral of the murdered, was not quite alone. He learned in those hours the whole discipline of the thing, and it was a discipline of patience past anything Ollivander had ever set him at the bench. A true name could not be hurried, and it could not be gripped. The moment Harry closed his attention too hard around a rising strand, the strand thinned and slipped, the way a dream slips when you turn to look at it directly, and he had to loosen and wait and let the next strand come to him of its own accord. He was gathering the sound of 40 years, and 40 years do not come quickly, and so he made himself into a patient cup and let the pear wand pour itself up into him one slow beat at a time. And he did it while his feet carried him along the galleries and his eyes moved across the dead, and his face wore the open, searching, obedient look of a boy doing as he was told, and the doing of two such different things at once, the still deep listening and the moving shallow pretending. Stretched him thinner than he had known a person could be stretched and not tear. The dead did not make it easier. He could not stop reading them, and each one he read cost him something he could not spare. On the third gallery he passed a wand of vine, supple and searching, that had belonged, he could tell, to someone who had spent a life looking for a thing, and had been ended a little before they found it. On the fourth he passed a matched pair of wands in a single case, brother wands, two feathers of one bird, and both of them stopped, both of them silenced, and he had to stand a moment with his hand against the cold glass, because he knew now what a pair of brother wands was, and what it meant that someone had hunted down both halves of one divided heart only to break them side by side and pin them under a single brass label like some cleverness. He read a wandmaker's own wand somewhere on the fifth gallery, a maker's wand with a maker's long patient love worn into every inch of it, and he understood that Vane had killed makers too, had come for people like Ollivander, like Harry himself, and stopped their voices and mounted them, and he had to turn his face up into the dark and breathe until the reading let him go. And all the while Ollivander talked. He talked from the iron chair in a dry, steady, unhurried voice of the history of the House of Bly, of how they had been great once and proud and had reached in the end for exactly the forbidden knowledge Vane had reached for and had fallen reaching. And Harry understood that his guardian was not reminiscing but working, laying out talk the way a man lays out rope over a cliff edge, hand over hand, so that Vane's cold attention would follow the talk and not the child. And every sentence the old wand-maker spoke was a minute bought and paid for out of his own steadiness, and Harry gathered the pair wand's name in the shelter of that voice the way a traveler gathers wood in the lee of a wall, and loved him, and could not say so, and drew up another strand of the name instead. Far off and behind him, north, across 300 miles of sleeping country, the holly wand sang louder by the hour. Harry did not turn toward it, he could not spare the attention. But he felt it grow, felt its patient note thread down under the whole cold hall, warm where everything around him was cold, alive where everything around him was dead, his where nothing else in that place was his, and it was, he understood dimly, the thing keeping him upright, the one clear voice in all that murdered silence telling him, over and over, without words, that he was loved, that he was not alone, that there was a home in the world with his name written on a box on a high shelf. And that he had only to hold on and finish the work, and he could go back to it. He held on. He finished the work, strand by strand, bead by slow bead, while the false night wore on and the dead kept their silence, and his guardian paid out rope from the iron chair, and the holly wand sang him upright from 300 miles away. It was well into the false morning when Emeric Vane's patience ended. Harry felt it end before Vane spoke, felt the cold in him tip over from wading into something worse, and he had by then nearly the whole of the pair wand's true name gathered and cupped and ready, all but the last strand, the final note that would make it whole and speakable, and he needed only a little more time, a few more minutes, and he was not going to be given them. "You are stalling," said Vane. He said it quietly as he said everything, but the quiet had gone flat and dead, and he rose from where he had been sitting and crossed to the iron chair, and he laid his bare left hand on the top of Ollivander's white head, gently, the way you might touch something you were about to break. "I have watched a great many people search for me over the years," Vane said, "under a great many kinds of pressure, and I know the difference between a searcher and a stall. You have walked my galleries all night and named me children's wands and healers' wands and told me nothing I did not know, and your face has been very blank and very busy, and I have begun to wonder what a boy who can hear what you can hear is truly doing with all that hearing, in a room where the only thing worth hearing is the wand at this old man's heart." His pale eyes came up and found Harry across the hall, and they were, at last, without any calm at all. "So we will change the arithmetic. You have until I count 10 to bring me the wand that does not end, and if you do not, I will loose the wand that does into his heart, not because I have given up on you, but because a boy who has just watched me murder his father will search a great deal faster and lie a great deal less. Do you understand me? I would rather have him breathing. But I have been afraid for 40 years, Harry Potter, and I am done being afraid, and I will spend him to end it if I must. 1. Harry stood very still in the cold blue light. 2. He had all but the last strand of the name, all but the last note. He reached for it fast now, faster than was safe, and the pair wand, feeling itself drawn on at last after 40 years of being heard by no one, gave a great shudder in its clamp, and the last strand came up toward him, rising almost his. 3. Do not reach for anything, boy. I see you reaching. I do not know for what, and I do not care. Be still. Harry made himself be still on the outside, entirely still, hands open, face lifted, while on the inside he closed his fingers in the language under words, around the last rising strand of the pair wand's true name. 4. Across 300 miles the holly wand sang out clear and woke fully at last and turned toward him, and its note came down into the hall like a shaft of light coming through a high window into a crypt, and Harry felt it fall across him, warm, glad, his, and it steadied his hands, and it steadied his heart, and the last strand of the pair wand's name settled into his cupped hearing, and the name was whole. 5, said Emeric Vane, and lifted his bare hand from Ollivander's head, and turned toward the pair wand in its clamp to loose it early, because he had counted the child's stillness and found it wrong, and he was, at the very last, too much a coward with his fear to wait for 10. And Harry, who had gathered a good and broken thing's true name out of 40 years of screaming, opened his mouth and spoke it. He did not speak it silently in the language under words, the way he had spoken to Ollivander and to the Blackthorn and to every wand of his whole life. He spoke it aloud. He had decided that somewhere in the long night, without quite letting himself know he had decided it, and he understood the whole of why only as he did it. Because a true name spoken in the wood tongue would call the wand and turn it, and that would be enough to save Ollivander, but it would be a private thing, a thing that happened only between a boy and a wand, and Emeric Vane, standing 3 feet away with his hand out to murder, would never hear it, would go to his ending as he had lived his whole life, deaf, in a cathedral of music he could not hear. And Harry, who could not stop being gentle even now, even here, even to the one about to kill his father, did not want that. He wanted the deaf man to hear once. So he spoke the pair wand's true name out loud into the cold air of the hall in the shape the old book gave it, the wood and the heart and the long red history all sung at once in a single sound that no throat should have been able to make, and that Harry's, for one impossible moment, made, and the dead hall heard it. The true name went out into the vast cold hall and did not echo, because a true name does not echo, it arrives. It arrived in every case on every gallery at once, in 30,000 ended wands, and though they were dead and could not answer, each of them, for the length of that one sound, remembered what it was to have a voice, so that the whole necropolis of Bly and Sons seemed for an instant to lean in toward the child in the middle of it. 30,000 silences all turned at once toward the single living note, and the cold blue witchlight shivered on 10,000 panes of glass. And in the iron clamp beside Ollivander's heart, the pair wand heard its own true name spoken by a hand that loved it, for the first time in the 40 years since a good wizard died on a battlefield and a frightened one took it off the body, and it woke wholly all at once out of 40 years of forced and screaming sleep, and it knew Harry and it turned to him. Emeric Vane had his bare hand out toward it to loose the curse. He never gave the command. The word died in his mouth because the sound Harry had made had reached him too, and Emeric Vane, who had been deaf to the voice of every wand since a curse ruined his hand on a lost battlefield, who had built a cathedral of 30,000 endings and heard not one of them, who had wanted the unbeatable wand his whole life for no reason but to stop being afraid of the loose one in his own grip, heard at last a wand speak. He heard the pair wand. He heard it the way Harry heard it, whole, the wood and the heart and the 40 red years, and Harry watched it reach him, watched the pale certain face come apart, because the deaf man was hearing, for the first and only time in his life, the voice of the wand he had tortured for 40 years, and the voice was not screaming any longer. That was the thing that undid him. Harry had spoken its name with love, and a wand called home by love does not depart in a scream. It departs in the note it was made to sing, the note it had never once been allowed to sing in Vane's hand, warm and generous and forgiving, a healer's note, and Emeric Vane stood in the middle of his life's work and heard the wand he had spent 40 years forcing to cruelty tell him, in the only voice it had, that it had never wanted to hurt anyone, that it had only ever wanted to mend, and that it was going now home to a hand that would let it, and it bore him no hatred at all. Which was worse, far worse than any hatred, because a man can live inside another man's hatred, but no one can survive being forgiven by the thing he wronged. The pair wand rose out of the iron clamp. It did not fly. It lifted gently the way a thing lifts when it is done being held down, and it crossed the 3 paces that no living person could cross, and it came into Harry's open hand, and it lay there, warm, quiet, whole, its 40-year scream finished at last, and it did not loose the curse into Ollivander's heart, because it was not Vane's any longer to loose, and it would not have loosed it in any case. Because it was a healer's wand come home to a healer's boy, and it would sooner have broken itself than end a life, and no trigger and no clamp and no fear-crazed arithmetic could make a wand that has come back to itself do murder for a hand it has left. And Emeric Vane sat down on the cold stone floor of the hall of Bly and Sons, in the middle of his 30,000 silences, and put his ruined hand and his whole hand over his face, and made a sound that Harry would hear in his sleep for years, not because it was terrible, but because it was not. It was the sound of a man who has spent 60 years deaf in a cathedral he built, hearing, for one moment, the music and understanding in the same moment that it had been there the whole time in every voice he stopped, and that he had murdered 30,000 of them without once hearing what he was killing, and that the only voice he would ever hear was the one he had wronged the longest, telling him it forgave him as it left him forever. He did not resist after that. There was nothing left in him to resist with. Harry, 11 years old, stood over the emptied wreck of the most dangerous man he had ever known with a warm pear wand in one hand and his whole strange art spent and shaking through him. And he did the only thing his nature had ever taught him to do with a broken thing, which was to be gentle with it, and he did not gloat, and he did not strike, and he crossed to the iron chair, past the ruined man on the floor who did not lift his head, and he knelt by his guardian, and he began. With hands that would not quite hold steady, to work at the wandwood chords. Harry, Ollivander said, his voice had almost nothing left in it. His silver eyes were streaming, and he was looking at the child at his knee as though at something that could not be, something out of the palest and oldest book made flesh in a cold cellar. Harry, you spoke it aloud, you let him hear it. You had him beaten and you let him hear it. You gave the one who came to murder me the one thing he wanted in all the world. At the very moment you took everything from him. Why? Why did you? Because he was never going to hear it any other way, Harry said. His own voice was shaking. And it wasn't fair. Nobody ever let him hear it. Not once in his whole life. I didn't do it for him. He got the first cord loose. I did it because I could hear it and he couldn't, and it wasn't fair, and I'm tired of things not being fair to people who can't hear. He looked up and his face was wet and he did not care. You taught me the reading is for that, for hearing the grief no one else can hear and naming it so the one carrying it isn't alone in it. You taught me that with the widower whose wife died. I didn't stop being that just because Vane was bad. I don't want to be somebody who stops. And Ollivander, bound to an iron chair in a cathedral of the murdered, with the one who had meant to kill him weeping and emptied on the floor, looked at the child he had raised from a cupboard, and understood that he had, without ever quite meaning to, made the one thing the whole long history of his craft had been waiting for and had never dared believe in. A wand friend whose gift had grown up inside a heart big enough to carry it, and he bowed his white head and wept and could not for a while say anything at all. That was how Dumbledore found them. He came the way weather comes, without a door opening, the far end of the great hall simply filling with a light that was not the cold blue witchlight, a warm gold light with the beat of wings in it, and Fawkes the Phoenix came down the length of the dead galleries in a long slow blaze, and 30,000-ended wands caught the gold of him on their glass as he passed, and behind the Phoenix walked Albus Dumbledore, unhurried, terrible, kind. With the elder wand loose in his hand and half a dozen grim figures in aura robes fanning silently out into the hall behind him, and he took in the whole of it in one sweep of the half-moon glasses. The emptied man on the floor, the freed wandmaker in the chair, the child kneeling at his knee with a warm pear wand in his hand and the last of the deep work shining off him like heat off a stone, and the 30,000 silences ranked up the walls, and the single living note of everything Harry had just done still hanging, fading in the cold air. The bell rang in my study at 10 minutes past 3, Dumbledore said, and his voice was very quiet, and it went into every corner of the vast hall. One clear note and then nothing, and I have never in 50 years heard that bell ring, and I knew at once, the way one knows the important things, exactly whose hand had rung it and exactly what it meant. I came as fast as a phoenix could carry me, Harry, and I cleared the ash from the shop, and I found the trail Vane left through Nocturne without meaning to, and I have run the whole way here with my heart in my mouth, certain I would come too late. He looked around the hall at the emptied man, at the freed prisoner, at the warm wand in the child's hand. And I find I have come too late after all. It is over. You have ended it. Before I arrived, before the Aurors arrived, alone with no wand of your own against a man who has eluded this office for 40 years. The blue eyes came to rest on Harry, and there was in them, at last, no calculation at all, only a very great and very quiet wonder. I have spent 7 years watching you from a careful distance, Harry Potter, and telling myself I was protecting you, and I begin to think I have had it precisely backward. Tell me what you did to him, for I have never in my life seen a man broken so, without a mark on him, and I have seen a great many men broken. And Harry, still kneeling by Ollivander, still shaking, told him in a few plain words, because he did not know how to tell it any other way, that Vane's wand had been loose, tortured loose over 40 years, that he had learned its true name, that he had called it home, and that he had spoken the name aloud on purpose, so that Vane, who had been deaf his whole life, would hear once the voice of the thing he had wronged, forgiving him as it left. The Aurors had gone very still. Dumbledore was silent a long moment. Then he looked down at the emptied man on the floor, at Emeric Vane, who had not moved, who was staring at nothing with the wet, ruined face of a man who has heard music at the end of a deaf life, and something moved in the old headmaster's face that Harry could not read, that might have been pity and might have been fear and was, Harry thought later, a little of both. You defeated him with mercy, Dumbledore said slowly. You had him beaten and you chose the one weapon that would unmake him utterly, and the weapon you chose was kindness. Do you know, Harry, in all my long life, and I have fought and beaten some very terrible men, I am not certain I have ever once done that. I have outthought them and outfought them and outlasted them, and I have told myself the whole time that I did it for love, and perhaps I did. But I do not think I have ever beaten a man by giving him the thing he most wanted. At the moment I took everything else. He was quiet again. I placed you where I placed you 11 years ago to keep you safe, and it went wrong, and out of the wrongness the wand maker made something I could not have made and would not have known how to make. I think I owe him an apology 20 years old, and I think I owe you a very great deal I do not yet know how to pay. Come. Let us get you both out of this dreadful place and into the sun and home. They took Emeric Vane away, unresisting, a hollow gray figure between two oars, and Harry watched him go and felt no triumph, only the old tiredness of a boy who has read one grief too many, and Dumbledore stood with him a moment and did not say anything foolish about it, for which Harry was grateful. The pear wand Harry gave in the end to Ollivander, who took it in both his old hands the way he took every wounded wand, and held it to the light into his ear and closed his eyes and said, 40 years. 40 years I have grieved this wand and thought it lost past mending, and here it is come home and whole and singing because a boy spoke its name. He opened his eyes and they were wet. I will not sell it, it has earned its rest. It will lie on the cushion in my window, Harry, where your holly wand once lay, and it will sing to the shop, and everyone who passes will think it only a pretty old wand of pear, and you and I will know it is the wand that beat Emeric Vane by refusing at the last to be cruel. The oarers moved through the hall of Bly and Sons in a widening hush, and Harry watched them come to understand, one by one, what they were standing in, watched the grim professional set of them falter as they lifted their own lit wands to the ranked and silent cases and read the brass labels and grasped slowly that the thousands upon thousands of wands around them were not a collection but a graveyard, that each pane of glass was a small tomb, and that the one they had just led away in irons had filled a cavern the size of a cathedral, one silenced voice at a time, over 60 years. One of them, a young witch with a scar of her own, put her hand over her mouth. Another began quietly, without being ordered, to write down the labels, name after name after name, because it seemed wrong to leave even the murdered nameless, and Harry, watching her do it, thought that perhaps she understood, a little, what he understood, and was glad of her. They cannot be mended, Ollivander said. He had risen from the iron chair at last, stiff and grey and leaning on Harry's shoulder, and he looked out over the galleries with his wet silver eyes, and his voice was heavy. Most of them. An ended wand is not a broken wand. A broken wand can sometimes be made whole, but a wand ended at the true name has had its marriage annulled in the deepest place, and the wood and the heart no longer know each other, and no maker living can reintroduce them. They are dead. 30,000 of them dead past mending. He was quiet a moment, and then he said, more quietly still, but they will not be nameless, and they will not be alone in the dark any longer, because that young woman is writing them down, and they will be taken up out of these cases and buried properly in earth among their own forest's roots, which is the only kindness left to do them, and I will see it done if it takes me the rest of my life. It is the least the craft owes them. Dumbledore had come to stand beside them, and he looked out over the hall with a face gone old and grave, and for a while none of them spoke. Then he turned to Ollivander, and he said simply, Garrick, 20 years ago I let it be understood in certain quarters that you were a difficult and secretive old man who hoarded a dead art out of vanity, and I did nothing to correct the understanding, because it suited me to have you underestimated and left alone. I was wrong. You did not hoard a dead art. You kept a living one alive, single-handed, through 80 years of solitude, at a cost I did not trouble to imagine, and then you spent it in your solitude and very nearly your life, raising the one child in 1,000 years who could carry it forward. I am sorry. It is a small word for so long an error, but I have found in a long life that the small words said plainly are worth more than the grand ones, and I mean this one. And Ollivander looked at him and inclined his white head and said only, we were both wrong, Albus, 20 years ago and since, and we have both, I think, been put right this morning by a boy neither of us deserved. Let that be an end of the apologies. He is tired, and so am I, and I want to go home. Harry was more than tired. He was scoured hollow, wrung out to the last thread, the deep work spent and the long night spent and the fear spent, and he stood swaying a little between the two old men with the warm pear wand still in his hand. And Fawkes the Phoenix came down out of the high dark of the ruined galleries in a slow blaze of gold and settled on his shoulder, light as a thought, and pressed its warm head once against his cheek, and Harry felt something of the day's weight lift off him at the touch. The way grief lifts a little when someone simply sits beside it, and he reached up and laid his hand against the phoenix's breast, the bird whose 2 feathers had made his wand and his scar, and neither of them needed to say anything about that, and neither of them did. They went home. Fawkes carried them, or something did. Harry never after could quite describe the journey, only that it began in a cold cathedral of the dead and ended, between one breath and the next, in the warm, resinous, familiar dark of Ollivander's shop, where the grey ash was cleared and the wards were whole again, and 5,000 wands, waking out of their drugged sleep to find their one friend come home alive, sang all together in a rising rush of relief and welcome that Harry felt in his teeth and his chest and the soles of his feet. The same song they had sung on the night he first came here, and at last, and yes, they did not do very much that first day home. There did not seem to be very much that needed doing, now that the enormous thing was done, and both of them were emptied out to the walls of themselves, and so they moved slowly about the shop in the gold morning light and let it hold them. Ollivander lit the stove, though it was July and warm, because the stove was a thing his hands knew how to do, and his hands wanted an ordinary thing to do. Harry swept the floor badly, because sweeping was a thing his hands knew, and the two of them worked in the good silence they had built between them over 7 years, and the wands watched them from the shelves, awake and whole and quiet, and the shop smelled of cedar and wood oil and cocoa, and it was the most beautiful ordinary morning Harry had ever stood inside. The wands had not stopped welcoming him. It was not the great rising rush of the first minute, when he had come out of the cold hall into the warm shop and 5,000 hearts had cried out their relief all at once. That had faded as such things do into something steadier and deeper, a low continuous chord under everything, the sound of a whole shop keeping its one friend in the middle of its attention, the way a family keeps a returned traveler at the center of the table. Harry felt it everywhere he moved. He had felt it in truth for 7 years and never once named it to himself, because you do not name the air you breathe. He named it now. It was love, the slow, patient wooden kind, 5,000 times over, and he had been living inside it since the night he was 4, and he had very nearly lost it forever in a cellar under Knockturn Alley, and he was never again going to make the mistake of failing to notice it. Toward evening, Ollivander made him sit down and would not let him get up, and made supper himself eggs, because it had been eggs on the first night, and it seemed right that it be eggs now. And the two of them ate at the workbench with the lamp lit between them and the shop dark and singing softly beyond the ring of light, and neither of them spoke of the Hall of Bly and Sons, or of Emeric Vane, or of the 30,000 dead, because those things would have their proper reckoning in the days to come in daylight. With the horrors and the burials and the long slow labor of setting right what could be set right, tonight was not for those things. Tonight was for eggs and the lamp, and the fact of both of them alive at the same bench, and that was enough, and both of them knew it was enough, and that knowing was itself a kind of feast. When Harry could not keep his eyes open any longer, Ollivander walked him back to the narrow bed in the warm little room that had been his since he was 4, and he turned down the gray blanket, and Harry got in, 11 years old and far too big for it now, his feet nearly to the end of it, and Ollivander drew the blanket up anyway, the way he had drawn it up on the first night, and rolled nothing back because there were no cuffs to roll. And sat on the stool a while in the lamplight the way he had sat that first night, an old man watching over a sleeping child in a shop full of things that loved them both. "I nearly lost you today," Ollivander said very low when he thought Harry was asleep. "And you nearly lost me, and neither of us did, and I am too old and too tired tonight to pretend I am anything but simply wholly glad." He was quiet a moment. "You are going to that castle in September, and you will be gone the greater part of every year, and I have been dreading it for a 12-month as a small grief, the loss of your company. I find I cannot dread it any longer. After today I can only be glad of every ordinary danger the world holds for you instead of that one. Glad of homework and cold dormitories and unfair teachers and all the safe small troubles of an ordinary boy, because you will be alive to have them and coming home to me at Christmas, and that is more than I let myself hope for this morning at 3 o'clock. Sleep, Harry, you are home, you have always been home, sleep." And Harry, who was not quite asleep and heard all of it and kept it, did not open his eyes or say anything, because some things are better received in the dark and given back later in the way you live. He only turned a little toward the old voice, the way he had turned toward the pine of a cupboard a lifetime ago, and let the low continuous chord of 5,000 wands carry him down into a sleep with no cupboards in it at all. And the Hogwarts letter came the very next morning, as though it had only been waiting, as perhaps it had, for the danger to be past. Aldous the Tawny Owl brought it home from the north at last with Ollivander's summons discharged, and he dropped it on the counter and looked enormously pleased with himself. And there it was, the heavy cream envelope, the green ink, Mr. H. Potter, the back room, Ollivander's, Diagon Alley, because the castle's quill had always known exactly where he slept, whatever the rest of the world believed. Harry turned it over in his hands and did not open it at once. He had waited 11 years for it. It could wait one morning more. "There is a thing to be done first," Ollivander said, "before you open that, and it is the thing I have wanted to give you right for 7 years, and I very nearly did not get to give you at all." He went to the high left-hand shelf, and he took down the box that had waited there since before Harry was born, the box that had rattled on the night a 4-year-old came in out of the cold, and he set it on the cleared counter, and he opened it himself, and the holly wand lay on its faded velvet, humming, patient, glad hole. "Its hour has come," Ollivander said softly, "not because you are cornered, not because you are afraid. Because the danger is past, and you are 11 years old, and you are going away to school in September to learn the ordinary magic, and a boy does not go to that school with no wand of his own. Its hour has come the right way at the last, exactly as I always wanted it to, and I am here to see it, which an hour ago in a cold cellar I did not think I would be. Take it up, Harry. It has waited for you longer than you have been alive. Let it wait no more." And Harry Potter, 11 years old, raised by a wandmaker from the age of 4, taught the whole forgotten art of the craft, reached out and took up the holly wand that had chosen him before he was born, and it woke in his hand in a rush of warmth that ran up his arm and filled the whole of him. Not with sparks, though there were sparks, gold ones, spilling and spinning up toward the dark, invisible ceiling of the shop. It filled him with the thing he had felt only once before, on the night he first came in from the cold, the thing he had spent 7 years learning the name of and would spend the rest of his life trying to deserve. It filled him with the sense of a sentence long begun at last complete, the wood and the heart in the child fused into one true note, and somewhere very far away in a cold and abandoned place its brother stirred and grieved a little less, because the holly wand had come home at last to the hand it was made for, and the divided heart was, for one bright instant across all the distance of the world, whole. Ollivander watched him hold it. He did not say anything clever or deep. He said only gruffly, the way he had said it once before over a rowan wand a boy had made with his own hands, "Well, there you are," and he turned away to hide his face and pretend it was the lamp smoke. And Harry, holding the other half of his own sentence at last, crossed the little distance between them and put his arm around the old wandmaker who had raised him. And the two of them stood there in the warm, singing dark of the shop that had been, from the very first night, the only home either of them had ever needed. While 5,000 wands sang softly around them and the Hogwarts letter lay unopened on the counter, and the morning came up gold over Diagon Alley, and neither of them said anything for a long while, because there was nothing that needed saying, and both of them for once knew it. Chapter 7 End.